Everybody loves spending their weekend going out somewhere. So do I, but what if something creepy happens? It once happened with me and my cousin. We both just freaked out, but it wasn't a big deal to a person we met there. So the story starts like this. I live in Mumbai, India. Once, I was sitting playing video games with my younger brother. My mom and dad were deciding on going out one weekend, and so they called up my uncle and asked that if he and his family can join us. And so the very next day we left our house and went to catch up the train which led us to our destination, Marathon, a very beautiful tourist spot surrounded by mountains in India. It took the whole day to reach there. It was lovely being there, and now we had to find a hotel to stay in. The only bad thing about this place is, it being the tourist spot, has hotels far away from each other, so that if there is a hotel in front of you, the other hotel will be 1 or 2 kilometers away. Half of our day wasted in search for this hotel, but finally we found the hotel that was just right for us. Not a big one, but a cheap hotel. We then registered over there, took our keys for our rooms. We took 3 rooms on rent, 1 for my parents, 1 for my uncle and his wife, and 1 for me, my brother, and my 2 cousins. We got all of our 3 rooms on the first floor of the hotel. When our parents slept, we all kids turned on the TV and watched movies. After some time, we heard some classical music coming out of the room beside ours, and it was too loud. So loud that we weren't able to listen to the movie dialogues. Then classical music was turned off, and suddenly it started again. We all decided to go and ask the neighbors to slow a bit the volume, but it was so dark that I, my brother, and one of my cousins didn't go out of the room, but my other cousin was kind of fearless, so we went alone. Now, it's not like he went and never came back, but he experienced something that he will never forget. So we went to the neighbor's door. It was a little bit dark over there, and rang the bell of their room, but the bell didn't work. So he looked at the door, and he was surprised to see that the door was locked from the outside. So he looked through the keyhole, and all he saw was a green light and nothing else. And when he looked into the keyhole, the music stopped. He then returned to our room, and he told us that the room was locked, and inside there was only a green light. Now, there was no music to be heard. We slept after some time. The next day, we went down in the lobby and asked the manager if there was anybody in the room staying beside us. Why, he asked. We told him everything that happened last night, and also that my cousin saw a green light through the keyhole. He was calm, like it wasn't a big deal to him. He told us that the room was closed from the last 3 years. 3 years back, a girl committed suicide in that room who came to Marathon to participate in a singing competition held over there. No one knows why she killed herself, and she was having green eyes, so the green light my cousin saw was nothing else but the girl's eyes. She was looking my cousin through the keyhole the same time he was looking through it. The manager stated whenever he gave a room beside the haunted one on rent, he got complaints about the loud classical music being played. When me and my cousin came to know this, we freaked out, and we forced our parents to change the hotel. That was the first and last time my cousin experienced something that creepy, but I experienced a few more, and I'll share them with you eventually. It was just after 11-ish at night in the Christmas holidays. Everyone had gone to bed. Some were still up reading, though. I was feeling a bit tired, so I thought I would try to sleep. I turned off my light and laid down, but try as I might, I could not get to sleep. It got to about past and I was still awake. It was like my body was asleep, but my mind was racing. I could hear footsteps down the hall. I thought it was my sister coming home from work. My bedroom door opened slightly. Maybe she was checking in on me, although she didn't usually do this. I then felt something on the bottom of my bed, next to my foot. My original thought was it's only the cat, but then I felt pressure on the other side of my feet. By this time, I was done convincing myself it was my sister or my cat, and was at the point of freakout. I clenched my jaw and didn't dare to move. I felt the original pressure be taken off, but quickly put back down. Only this time, it was around my knees. The same happened with the second place, and continued alternating faster and faster, until finally I felt a weight on my chest, but I didn't want to open my eyes. It felt so heavy that I couldn't breathe or move, and I had to do something. I opened my eyes and looked. Green eyes looked back at me. I couldn't help myself. I screamed as loud as I could, and my grandmother came running. My door flung open on its own, and my grandmother stopped in the cross-section of the hall in front of my room. She waited a moment and came in. I was sitting up in bed, and I felt so hot, and I asked my grandmother if I had a fever. She put her hand on my head and said, "No, your skin is ice cold." I don't think I'll ever forget those eyes, or how hot I was. When I was younger, my parents and I tended to move a lot, mainly because my mom despised staying in one place for too long. As she often said, there are simply too many things to do and see, so why settle? I was 7 when we got a job offer in Springfield, Missouri at the primary school. Of course, she jumped on the opportunity, and we said goodbye to Lebanon, packed up our few belongings, and were off. She had found a nice apartment for us. It was a 2-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and cozy yet spacious, with lots of children for me to play with and only 5 minutes from the school she would be teaching at. Within a week, we were settled, and Mom was pushing me outside to socialize. I was always a socially awkward child, mainly because I was shy, making it really hard for me to relate with other kids, nonetheless communicate. I hopped on my bike and started riding the sidewalks, watching for someone close to my age to play with. Oddly enough, for a sunny Saturday, there wasn't a lot of people out and about, so I headed towards a small playground that was between the 2 apartment buildings. It had a large tire swing and a slide attached to what looked like a clubhouse, so I parked my bike and started swinging. I decided to get lost in my thoughts when I heard a female voice from behind me. "Hey, mind if I swing with you?" I turned startled, toppling over the tire swing into the sand. A tall, thin girl with long, wavy brown hair, wearing a buttoned-down yellow sleeveless shirt and white capris, was staring at me, trying not to laugh. "You all right there, Jumpy?" She chuckled, extending a hand towards me. "Yeah, you just startled me," I said, brushing the sand off my back. "What's your name?" "Rebecca, but you can call me Becca. And you?" "Elena. You still want to swing?" She smiled and climbed on the tire swing, waiting for me to join her. "So are you new here? I don't think I've seen you around." "Yeah, we just settled in not long ago. How long have you lived here?" "A pretty long time, I guess." I looked at her puzzled. How could she not know? I shrugged it off and changed the subject. We talked for the longest time about anything and everything that came to mind. For the first time in a long while, I had finally found someone that I had something in common with. Maybe I've actually made a friend, I thought to myself, smiling, as I watched the little boy and his mom heading towards the playground. "You want to come to my apartment and get a drink? It's kind of hot and you can meet my mom," I said, stopping the swing. No sooner I had finished my sentence, the little boy's mom walked up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Sweetie, who are you talking to?" I turned around and Becca was gone. I looked around to see what direction she had ran, but she was nowhere in sight. I was talking to Becca. She's the girl that was swinging with me. Did you see the way she went? The woman studied me and shook her head. She's loco, Mama, laughed the little boy. I thanked her, blushing with embarrassment, and got on my bike to look for Becca, but I never saw her again, nor did I ever mention her until now. I'm not sure why she approached me, or why she was lingering around the apartment complex, but I will never forget my disappearing friend. My story took place in Colmar, France. It's a town near Germany. My grandparents were quite young during World War II and told me many stories about that town. When I was 4, my parents and my mother's parents bought a 2-story house in Colmar with a beautiful garden. My grandparents lived on the first floor, and my parents and me on the second floor. There was a basement, which was separated in 3 rooms, a storage room, a room for my father, and a laundry room, an attic, and next to the attic, a small storage room at the time. I loved the basement. I always played there or in the garden. I never was afraid of the basement, but the attic terrified me. I remember I was 4 and my mother put some boxes in the attic. I followed her and felt very uneasy. It was dark and I felt eyes on me. I looked in every direction, but I never saw anything. I was little and I thought that there was a beast up there. Not a monster, a beast. I don't know why. Fast forward. I'm 8 years old. In the summer of 1991. I played every Saturday with a friend, Melanie. I had this genius idea of searching the house to find a secret passage. I had read a book about a girl finding a secret passage in her house, and I was sure there was one, because my house was quite old. We searched the basement, but found nothing, so we eventually went to the attic. It was such a strange place. It was L-shaped, but the left part of that place was totally dark, so we had to bring a flashlight. What I could never explain was a hole in the wall at the right corner of the attic. It was 3 feet tall and quite narrow, but by looking into it with the flashlight, one could see a room, but there was no entry, just this hole. Nobody could enter in. This room was actually behind a small storage room next to the attic. Maybe there was a passageway, but we never found any. So we were looking through this hole when I felt uneasy again. I felt something in the attic with us. I kept looking at the far end, where there was no light, and was sure that something would come at us. I saw nothing, and we went out playing in the garden. We went back to the attic. We were fearless young girls. My friend never felt anything, so I thought that I had an overactive imagination. So this time, I was looking through the hole, and my friend had the flashlight. She was standing at the far end of the attic, and suddenly, she asked me, "What's that?" I looked in the beam of the flashlight and froze. There was a young man sitting on the floor, his knees against his chest. His arms were crossed on his knees, like he was hugging himself. He turned his head towards us and smiled. We bolted out of the room and went to the storage room. My heart was pounding. I was out of breath. I first thought that it was a real live person, but he had no color. It was like a 3D dark shadow, and we never heard any footsteps. My friend refused to admit that we saw a ghost, and we never talked about it. I never saw him again, but the storage room became my room when I was a teen, and sometimes I heard strange noises. Bangings on the wall which was connected to the secret room, and scratching noises. My grandmother learned later that our house was a clandestine printing office for World War II. The owners printed slogans against the Germans, but I think there was something else in that house. I believe that the secret room was used to hide people. But forever and ever, I'm terrified of the attic. We moved out 3 years ago, but I still have nightmares. Man in a trench coat staring at me. After being considerably bored at work one day, I decided to Google ghost stories, as I've personally seen and dealt with them before, and came across this site. I love reading the stories, and it got me all jazzed up to tell mine. It probably all started when I was 14. I'm now 24. My family and I were on a week-long camping trip when my dog passed away. This dog that we had, Max was his name, was the family dog, but being at a young age when we got him, I became the closest to him. After I had learned that he died, I was so upset that my family had to cut the vacation short just to get me home. I had just moved into a room in my parents' basement, and it had no door to it. Now, where my bed was located, when looking out the door, you could see the furnace to the house. One night, I woke up and grabbed a sip of water from a water bottle I always keep beside my bed, and happened to look towards the entrance of my room. Sitting in the doorway was my dog Max. Now, since this happened so long ago, I've constantly said to myself that this was a dream only because when I started calling Max to me, I remember specifically his eyes glowing red and him then jumping on my bed and trying to attack me. That ended up scaring the bejesus out of me. After the whole dog dream, I've not seen Max since. Later, when I would wake up and roll over, I would steal a look to the door, and I would see a giant man, like a silhouette, standing in my doorframe staring at me. To me, it looked like he was wearing a huge trench coat with some sort of hat with a huge brim. The first time this happened, I was so frightened that I dared not to stare at him too long, as he would attack me like my dog. It became constant. Like every night, I would see him, and for the first while, it scared me to no ends, but I became used to it, and later, when I would see him, I would just roll over, smile, and go back to sleep. One morning, after seeing the dude in my doorway the night before, I was speaking with my parents about a bad dream I had the night before. My mom chuckled as my dad also had a nightmare the same night and told me to go ask him about it. When I asked Pops about his dream, he told me that he was dreaming about a guy who broke into the house, made his way into my sister's room, and ended up killing her. This woke him out of his sleep, and when he looked out the hallway into the kitchen, he said he actually saw someone leave my sister's room. The two rooms are right beside each other that lead into the hall that leads into the kitchen, and walk into the kitchen. He said he got up and ran to the kitchen, and when he flipped the light on, no one was there. It was then that I told him that I always see someone standing in the doorway every night, and he just told me it was the furnace. What the hell? After I turned 18, I was still seeing this guy. My friends would spend the night, and in the morning, they would explain to me how they saw a guy standing in the middle of the room, thinking it was me, and then explain what he looked like. That was when activity in the house started to pick up. My family and I would constantly see things out of the corner of our eyes. My mother one night told me about a floating person with a tiny smile on their face, waving to her. Loud, unexplained noises followed up by things. One night, it was all of our empty bottles lined up on our freezer, which I thought was hella cool, moving unexplained. I feel like I might be dragging this on, and I have a bit more to talk about, so I think I will make a part 2 about my experiences in the future. Looking back to them, I think things only get worse for me. Nightmares with ghosts and demons. And we ended up getting the house blessed. But like I said, that will be another story. Thanks for listening and reading my story. Indonesian Black Magic. I was reading another story here about black magic, which reminds me of an incident that occurred almost 20 years ago. It's probably not as scary as other stories on here, but it's definitely odd. My family immigrated to Canada when I was 9. Years later, I was living with my mom, brother, grandma, cousin, and an Indonesian houseworker. My maternal relatives are all Chinese Indonesians. At that time, my mom was too busy to take care of us, so our aunt found a houseworker, cleaner, caretaker from Indonesia to help around. I can't remember her name. We always changed houseworkers, but let's call her Mia. She's quite an easygoing person. I was probably the only one who casually talked and joked with her the most, regardless of our status. One day, when I returned home from school, I didn't see Mia. She was usually in the kitchen or somewhere on the first floor at this hour, so I asked my grandma about it. She told me Mia was in the basement, resting in her room. Then she said, in the early afternoon, Mia suddenly came up from the basement, crying uncontrollably and trying to hug my grandma for comfort. Her hair was cut short, like really short to the point some parts of her scalp were almost exposed. It was not nicely cut either, as if someone had randomly snipped her hair strand by strand. She looked like a mess. I remember my grandma saying that Mia got snipped hair all over my grandma's clothes when Mia was hugging her. A while later, Mia calmed down and went back down to the basement for a sleep. I should note that my grandma doesn't speak Indonesian or English, so she couldn't communicate or ask what was going on. One thing for sure is, no one else was in the house except Mia and my grandma. For the next few days, Mia still cleaned around the house, but she looked really down and emotionless. I was a bit scared to talk to her. My cousin bought her a wig, and that was what she wore every day. No one else told me what really happened that day. Slowly, things went back to normal, and Mia was also returning to her usual self. I forgot how the conversation started, but she opened up the details to me about that weird incident. She was just resting in her room, and then the next thing she remembered was her hair was cut short, and her hair was everywhere. To her surprise, she was the one holding the scissors. By the time she realized it, she broke down and rushed upstairs. The rest was what my grandma told me. Then she was telling me about her life back in Indonesia. She had a boyfriend back home and had often dreamed about him, always telling her to come back to Indonesia. Her parents hate him though, and instead wanted her to marry another rich man. She doesn't like him at all, which was why she left home to work in Canada, so she could avoid him. She suspected that man probably hired someone to cast a spell on her and made her cut her own hair as a punishment for running away from him. At that time, I didn't know much about black magic or voodoo. Actually, even now I still don't know much about it. I just had an idea that it's something similar to cursing someone and causing them to have bad luck. Weeks after the incident, my mom said Mia had returned to Indonesia. I asked her why. All she said was because her contact terms had ended with us, although I really didn't believe that. My mom was probably afraid more unusual events might somehow get us all involved. Thanks for reading. Now, to start with a little background, I was 5 years old at the time this occurred, living with my mom in an apartment. My parents had recently separated. The layout of the apartment was you walk in, and to the right is the kitchen. Beside the kitchen, to the further right, is the dining area. Go forward from the door, and there's a hallway on the left where the bathroom and my mom's room were. Go straight and take a step down into a sunken living room. To the left of the living room looks like closet-type horizontal wooden slat doors, but those were actually the doors to my room. Moving along. That day, I was at home sick. I had a terribly sore throat and could barely speak. I had cream of tomato soup and a toasted bologna sandwich for lunch and could not finish the sandwich as the toast was too hard and hurt my throat. The point of me telling you this is so that you know that I remember the details of the day leading up to my experience. I digress. I spent the day with my mom and cuddled with her while we watched Young and the Restless, a movie, of course. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by the sound of the chain coming off the door and the deadbolt unlocking. I thought that it was my mom letting her boyfriend into the apartment as he worked until late at night. I heard footsteps coming through the hall and down into the living room, stopping right outside my door. At that point, I was terrified. I didn't hear my mom talking to her boyfriend or him say anything at all, and it was completely silent. The wooden slats in my door shifted and opened, and I saw a 6-foot cartoon clown standing outside the door, looking in at me. I know it might sound funny that it was a cartoon, but I guarantee you that it was terrifying. It opened the door and came into my room. It walked over to me, standing above me in my bed. I was trying to scream, but because my throat was so sore, I couldn't make any noise. It had a teapot or something in its hand and was holding it over me and was starting to pour something onto me. I started thrashing around in my bed, trying to make it go away. It worked. It was like I hit rewind on a video. A slow rewind, but a rewind nonetheless. The clown backed out of my room, closed the door, the slats closed again. I heard the footsteps retreating through the apartment, the door open and close, and the deadbolt and chain go back on the door. I tried calling my mom, but my voice still wasn't working. I finally got up the courage to go and get my mom, and she came and slept with me. She didn't believe me, and her, along with the rest of my family, laughs hysterically and brings up my little story. I know more than anyone how ridiculous it sounds to have a cartoon clown torment you. I also know that most of you will not believe me and say that because I was a child that I was just imagining things. But I wasn't. I know what I saw, and I know it was terrifying. The Joker. I was 8 years old when my Aunt Wendy, who lived in Tennessee, gave me a porcelain Joker doll that had what looked like a red teardrop. We were getting ready for bed, and since we were staying with them, we didn't have anywhere to put it. My mom set it on the shelf in the front room. While my mom and I were lying there talking, we got the feeling that something was watching us. When we looked around, no one was in there, and everyone was asleep. My mom looked over to the Joker doll and noticed it was pointed towards us. Knowing she had faced it towards the door, my mom got up and turned it to face the wall. We laid there talking for a few minutes when we heard a scratching noise on the shelf, like something heavy was being turned around. When we looked over to the shelf, the Joker doll was pointed towards us again. Thinking it was my cousin, we went in her room to see. She was asleep. I knew this as I hit her leg, and she was never a good faker. After realizing she was asleep, we went back into the front room and laid the Joker flat on its face. Later that night, with everyone still asleep, my mom got up to use the bathroom and realized that the Joker was lying on its back. So my mom got it and put it in the bag with our clothes, and the feeling as if something was watching us left. The next morning, we got a call about a house. In the process, my mom told my dad that she wanted to get rid of the doll. My dad said no, because my aunt gave it to me. We were unloading some stuff, and my mom put the Joker doll in our hallway closet, hoping my dad wouldn't find it. Much to our dislike, my dad watched my mom put it there. My dad brought it in my bedroom and put it on my dresser. He said, "This is where I want it to stay." The feeling of being watched returned. I was lying there and glanced at my dresser to the Joker doll and noticed it had an evil smile on its face. I hollered for my mom, and when she came in, she noticed it too, so she put it in my drawer. The next morning, we were telling my dad about what happened. He was not believing in that stuff, told us to shut up, and that we were making it up. My mom decided to call my aunt Wendy and asked her if they ever noticed anything out of the ordinary, and my aunt said yes. That was the reason they put it in the shed out back. Later that night, my dad came home from work, and we told him what my aunt had told us. Unfortunately, my aunt denied it all, making my mom and I look like idiots. So again that night, my mom put it back in the dresser drawer. She went to turn the coffee pot on so Dad would have coffee the next morning and went to bed. The next day, my mom and I were sitting in the kitchen. My dad came into the kitchen holding the Joker doll and told us that he said he wanted it to stay on my dresser. Being 8 years old, I knew I had better listen to him, so I went and put it on my dresser. He then started cussing, saying that he didn't see any problem with the Joker doll, and we better keep it on my dresser. He didn't believe in stuff like that. I asked my mom if she would lie down with me, and she said yes. Still feeling an evil presence in the room, my mom said a prayer with me, and we fell asleep. The next morning, when my dad got up, he came into the room where we were and told my mom he wanted the doll out of there. My mom says that she thought he didn't believe in things like we had been telling him, yet he just now decides that he wants the doll out of the house. He began telling her that the night before, he got up to use the bathroom, stepped into my room, and the Joker doll had an evil smile on its face, and he heard an evil laugh. Now believing us, he went in my room, got the Joker doll, and took it outside and tried to burn it. Only the clothes burnt, and the face turned black from the smoke. Then he got it out of the trash barrel and hit it with a hammer, but only part of its face chipped. Getting freaked out, he took it to the neighborhood dumpster and threw it in there. We never saw it again, and everything in my room went back to normal. A week later, I became friends with a boy in my class, and we were all over at his parents' for supper when I looked in the front room. On a shelf, there was a Joker doll, just like the one I used to have. Later, my mom asked if she could look at it, and she noticed a mark where it was made that mine didn't have, and it didn't have the red teardrop. After seeing that, my mom asked where they got it from. They told her what store, and my mom called my aunt Wendy to ask her about my doll. She told my mom the same store. My mom asked my aunt about the teardrop, and my mom called my aunt Wendy to ask her about my doll. She told my mom the same store. Mom asked my aunt about the teardrop, and my aunt said she asked the store clerk about it, as it was the only one. The teardrop didn't look like any kind of paint, that it looked more like blood. When my dad got on the phone, he asked my aunt about it again. My aunt told him what they had experienced. They thought that it didn't have anything to do with the Joker doll, even though she said they felt an evil feeling, like someone watching them, which went away when the Joker doll was in the shed. You can choose to believe this or not, but if you don't, please don't post any rude comments. I was wondering if the reason the Joker doll was like that could have been made by someone who was really into witchcraft. Thanks for reading. Another clown? During the early 70s, when my family lived for a time in Fresno, my mom decided to divorce my dad and moved herself, me, and my little sister, Ruth, into government housing, which was not bad. I thought the little semi-detached two-story houses were cute with their wooden floors. When my dad was around, my parents would argue loudly, so I thought it was just as well they were getting a divorce, whatever that was. To my 6-year-old mind, divorce was what happened to your family when you got to a certain age, like your teeth coming in. At least that's what it seemed like. Once I fell down the stairs, maybe pushed, but I was very adventurous and was probably practicing my flying. Luckily, I didn't break my neck and was only a little bruised. Another time, I rolled off my bed and fell into my metal dollhouse. There were no lawsuits back in those days, so the manufacturers of metal dollhouses were at liberty to produce razor-sharp objects for small children to disassemble and play with. But nothing supernatural ever happened that I knew of. Then, just a few years ago, my mother mentioned the ghost your sister used to see in our house in Fresno, and I soon got the story out of my sister. This is what she says happened to her to the best of my recollection. One moonlit night, she awoke on her little bed next to my big bed. She got up, wearing her itchy, footy pajamas, and toddled down the hall to use the toilet. When she returned, there on the floor was something she had never seen before, nor has she seen since. Something that looked like a clown's head was moving back and forth around the floor. It was slightly larger than a volleyball and had a painted look, white skin, wide, grimacing reddish lips, and huge yellow, googly eyes that were rolling around in their sockets. She remembers nothing definite after that, which I have read indicates a possible nightmare in children. She says she may have run into our mom's room and jumped into her bed with her, but she's not sure. "You left me in there with that thing?" I asked her. "You were asleep," she answered. I asked her how she felt this experience affected her life. "You become very open-minded about certain things," she said. "One thing I know, Ruth was an extremely intelligent child who well knew the difference between make-believe, dreaming, and reality." Thanks for reading. Hope it wasn't too long and boring. This happened a couple of years ago. We had just moved into a new house. I was getting used to living in a different neighborhood, and it wasn't really easy. One night, my parents weren't home, so I invited my friend over. We were sitting in my room, talking about boys, when my friend said she had to go to the washroom. While she was in the washroom, I went downstairs to go get a snack for us to eat without telling her. As I went downstairs, she came out of the washroom and was stunned I was coming back upstairs. She asked, "How did you leave so quickly when I was just talking to you?" I was shocked. I told her that I had been downstairs and I didn't even talk to her while she was in the bathroom. We both were freaked out, and she told me the voice sounded exactly like mine. That night, when my parents returned home, me and my friend were getting ready to go to bed. We fell asleep at around, I would say 1:30 a.m. The next morning, I awoke and my friend left to go home. I was walking up the stairs. I had this feeling as if someone was following me. I looked back and I saw this dark thing walking behind me, and
As it walked after me, its hood came out of nowhere and just became more visible. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door. I told my parents about what had happened. They didn't really believe me. So I asked my mom who had lived in this house before us, and she told me that this lady and her kids had lived here. She had this worried look on her face. I asked her what had happened, and in a light voice, she said the woman who lived here before had committed suicide in our laundry room. I was terrified. Sometime after that, I went to do my laundry when the door had slammed shut. I was scared to death. I quickly opened the door and ran out of the laundry room. After that day, I never saw anything again until I had to take care of my baby cousin with my friend. We were playing with her in the spare room when she pointed up at the ceiling and started to cry uncontrollably. I ran and got my camera. When I took a picture of where she was pointing, I could see this white weird shaped thing. We were terrified. After that, I showed my parents the picture and they invited the priest to bless our house. Ever since that day, I haven't seen a ghost. Thank God, peace and love. Monster in the laundry room. In September 2005, my husband, myself, our 3 children, and of course, the lovable dog, moved into our house. It is a renovated lakefront cottage built in the 1930s in a rural town of upstate New York. We were drawn to the house for its charm and the peaceful lake. But I must say that I did feel a bit uneasy when we first moved in. Within the first few weeks of living there, I experienced some strange happenings. The house is a ranch style with a partially finished basement, an unfinished laundry room, and workshop. There is also a dirt floor, crawl space that you can only access from an outside door. I still can't bring myself to go in there. One night, while carrying a basket of laundry up the basement stairs, the stairwell light flickered out. I tried the light switch at the top of the stairs a few times, but could not get it to work. I told my husband that we needed a new bulb, and when he flicked the switch, the light went on. It happened again the next night, and I made him change the bulb. Well, this flickering continued for a couple of weeks, even after the bulb changed. While this was happening, my dog was also acting bizarre. After I would get up to the top of the stairway, he wouldn't follow me up like he normally would, but instead would sit at the bottom of the stairs and bark at me as if he didn't know me, almost as if he was staring right through me. He did this every day. A short time later, I woke early one morning before my husband left for work and found the front door wide open. Now, I know that I shut and locked the door before going to bed, and when I questioned my husband about it, he denied leaving it open. I decided to mention what was going on to a coworker of mine who had some knowledge of spiritual activity, and she suggested talking to the spirits and asking them to leave. I did, and other strange noises every now and then started to appear. Everything seemed to stop after that, though. Until last night. We recently finished renovating part of the basement, which is actually ground level because of the grading of the land, and closed off 2 doors that used to give access to the basement from the outside. We made a master bedroom, a bathroom, and my 4-year-old son's bedroom. There's a door from the master that goes into the laundry room, which is in the unfinished part of the basement. Well, my son woke up in the middle of the night last night and climbed in between my husband and I. He had a hard time falling back asleep. After my husband left for work in the morning, my son and I were laying in bed, and he was staring at the open laundry room door. He said, "Mom, when I move close to you, the monster has a sad face, and a very angry one too. But when I move to Daddy's side, the monster smiles." I said, "Where is the monster?" And he replied, "Right there, in the laundry room. He has a white face and red feet, and his head is up to the ceiling. When I move next to you, he gets a mad face." I asked him if the monster talks to him, and he said, "No, but he puts his hand next to his mouth and whispers only at night." He also told me that the monster thinks this is his house. We got out of bed, and I walked towards the laundry room to take a closer look. But my son said, "No, don't go in there. He gets mad." I didn't see anything, so I asked my son to show me where the monster was, but he couldn't look. He seemed terrified. He just said, "Tell him to leave Mom. He freaks me out." We went upstairs, and my son was telling his 10-year-old sister about the monster. She asked if she could show her where he was, so we brought her down to the basement. He came running upstairs a minute later, saying, "Yep, he's still there." His sister couldn't see it. After thinking about this, and what happened when we first moved in, I then remembered that when our next door neighbor came to introduce herself, she mentioned a couple who used to live in our house several owners ago that would always argue and fight. Well, apparently the husband went missing, but that was all she had said. It all seems too coincidental now. I have a feeling it will be a long night. Laundry visitor. I'm sharing this story on behalf of my dad. This experience occurred to him almost 20 years ago, but I was at home asleep at this time in my bedroom upstairs. My dad is originally from Europe, and most of his family still reside over there. The way they lived many years ago is certainly a lot different to how we live now. The toilet was outside. They had to wash all their clothes by hand, in the river, etc. Of course, since then, many things have changed, which is great for them. It was a Saturday morning, and my dad was downstairs in the laundry, sorting out the washing. All of a sudden, from the corner of the room, he saw a white mist appear. It then turned into the apparition of his sister, who had died many years before. He told me by this point, she appeared like a real human. In a soft voice, she said to him, "Dear, look how lucky you are now to have a machine to do your washing, when I had to use my hands in the river." After that moment, she faded into a swirling mist, into a corner of the ceiling, and disappeared. Dad did not even have a chance to say anything to her. He just stood there completely shocked, but certainly not scared. After that moment, he tells me to this day, he could not believe what he had seen, and he felt very at peace with their presence there in front of him. Needless to say, he says he made himself a very strong cup of coffee after that experience. Has anyone had any experience where a loved one who has passed has gone to greet another loved one before they could get a chance to speak in such a manner and respond, before evaporating into the cold air? This all started about 2 years ago. Just like the rest of the house, the laundry room and garage has always given me the creeps. The laundry room is located in a small room in what we call the far garage. We have two car garages, and it is located in the furthest one. This far garage has always been the epicenter for creepiness. One day, I was going out to switch the laundry from washer to dryer, and as I got there, I saw that both the washing machine and dryer lids were open mid-cycle. I just thought, okay, someone came out here looking for something and forgot to close them. I asked my mom and boyfriend if they had been out there. Both said no. Seemed kind of strange. Then, it happened again. Both lids open, mid-cycle, nothing missing. Only this time, I had been home alone the entire time the clothes had been going. This has happened to me maybe 4 or 5 times. It's not that I left them open. The washing machine's lid is located on the top, so it didn't fall open. Plus, they won't start unless the lids are shut, so I didn't forget to shut them. Nothing blatantly scary, just unsettling. I have yet one more story about the experiences I've had in my home, and it really takes the cake on full-out scariness. In another post, I will detail this event. Thanks for reading. The washing machine. Just a short story here, and it is true. I'm not a believer in ghosts, and not an easy guy to scare. But this did the trick. I'll tell you in advance that I don't have an answer to what happened, but would like to hear your thoughts. It's all true, and a major puzzle to me. Our top-loading washing machine is in the basement. It's a nice basement, not a dark, spooky place. The room has bright lights, and because it's in the basement, there is no way to enter this room from the outside of this house. Okay, here we go. At least half a dozen times in the past year, I've gone done to put the wash into the dryer after the washing time should have long elapsed. Imagine my surprise to find the wash not finished and the top cover of the lid of the washing machine up. The fact that the lid is up means that the washing cycle has not been completed. Each time, I just scratched my head and wondered how this could happen. Just the other day it happened. This time, as I went back into the washroom, I switched on the light and looked to see the top up once again. But this time, I heard something move in the room. It was the sound like a dog would make if you woke him up from sleeping and he just bounced up. And we don't have any pets. The hair on my arms went straight up as I looked around the room, but I never found anything. We saw John F. Kennedy in the early 1990s. I know that you probably won't believe my story, but it is true. My honor and dignity as a Christian is important to me. Even today, I am still frightened by what I saw that day back in the early 1990s. I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and was working in a retail store as a sales manager back then. The day was as usual as a summer day is, June or July, and the sun was shining bright. Inside the store, I began walking to the back of the store to go on break or to get my paperwork. I can't remember which. This store was large, and when I had walked a certain distance, it seemed like time had stood still, and nobody was around me. It was really strange. Only a good friend and fellow sales manager was near me, and then we both saw him. A man came walking forward towards us, and we just stood in awe at what we were seeing. We both knew instantly who the man was. You see, the man was President John F. Kennedy. At an age he would have been in the early 1990s, in his early 70s with gray hair. Well, you might ask, could it have been a person who resembled the late President Kennedy? No, because something about him made us know who we were seeing. The man wore ordinary clothes, but he had a massive scar down the entire left side of his skull, the very area the fatal headshot was fired and killed the president in Dallas, Texas, on November 1963. It looked as if that side of his entire skull had been blown away and reattached somehow. The scar marks were plainly visible to see. He looked right at me and continued walking until he got out of sight. My friend and I just stood there, staring at each other. I said, "Did you just see what I saw?" And my friend replied, "Yes, but I'm sure not going to tell anybody about it." We agreed to keep quiet. I ran to find the Kennedy ghost man again, but he was gone. He simply vanished. This story is absolutely true, and I never even told my fiance about it. I keep asking myself today why the deceased President John F. Kennedy would contact me, of all people. He had always been my favorite US president, but this was truly a crazy experience. I indeed saw John F. Kennedy in some sort of purgatory spirit world, or his spirit contacting me in one form or another. John Lennon's ghost. On December 8th, 1980, former Beatle John Lennon and his wife, Yoko Ono, were just returning home to the Dakota, a luxury apartment building in Manhattan, when a deranged fan shot Lennon 5 times in the back near the entrance to the Dakota. En route to Roosevelt Hospital, John Lennon died. John Lennon was 40 years old. Lennon had an open mind when it came to the paranormal. While traveling and living at the Dakota, he reported seeing a spectral figure walking down the corridors, which he referred to as the crying lady ghost. He told his first wife, Cynthia Lennon, that if he passed away, he would contact her. In 1986, Cynthia reported that John had indeed sent her a sign. She found a dead jackdaw wrapped in old newspapers, dated 1956, behind the fireplace in her home in Cumbria. John had told her if there was life after death, he would prove it by sending her and Julian, their son, a feather as a sign. John's ghost has been seen at the Dakota on several occasions. In 1983, 3 years after Lennon's death, Joey Harrell, a musician accompanied by a writer friend, Amanda Moores, spotted Lennon near the entrance where he was shot. Moores stated she was tempted to approach Lennon and talk, but his expression dissuaded her. Harrell reported that when Lennon appeared, an eerie light surrounded him. Yoko Ono also encountered John Lennon's ghost at the Dakota. She stated that she saw him sitting at his white piano. He turned to her and said, "Don't be afraid. I am still with you." Paul McCartney described these encounters he had with Lennon's ghost. In 1995, when he, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr were singing Lennon's song Free as a Bird during a recording session, McCartney stated he felt Lennon was in the studio with them. As it turned out, this was more than just a feeling. McCartney went on to state, there were a lot of strange going-ons in the studio, noises that shouldn't have been, and equipment doing all manner of weird things. In another encounter, McCartney said that during a photo shoot for the single, a white peacock wandered over from the neighboring farm. At the last minute, the beautiful bird made its presence known. McCartney felt it was the spirit of John Lennon hanging around as they wrapped the recording. McCartney stated to Harrison and Starr, "That's John. Spooky, eh?" After the recording, while McCartney, Harrison, and Starr listened to the single's B-side, he stated that John again was making his presence known. McCartney explained they had just put a spoof backwards recording on the end of the single for a laugh and to amuse fans. As they listened to the finished single one night in the studio, McCartney swears, as it got to the end, they heard John Lennon in the recording itself. Paul McCartney stated that he and George and Ringo, after this, knew it was John and that he was sending his approval.
This story begins when I was a child, probably about 7 years old. My mom and aunts threw a huge Halloween party for all the kids in the family. I think there were 16 of us at the time, ranging in age from probably 5 to 13. It was awesome, but the coolest part came about the time it just got really dark. We took a hayride to a cemetery a few miles down the road from my aunt and uncle's, where the party was being held. My mom told us about some of the people buried there and how some of them were not resting in peace. Typical urban legend stuff. When we got there, the adults said they wanted us to show us the grave of an old man whose ghost was seeking revenge for his wrongful death. We were all scared and excited, creeping through the cemetery in the dark towards the largest tombstone. When we were about halfway there, my dad and uncles popped up from behind the graves, wearing scary masks. The kids all screamed and ran for the wagon, while the ghosts and moms all laughed. For years, the adults retold this story, laughing over the details of our panicked faces and terrified attempts to get away. When I was a teenager, my sister and 2 of my cousins decided to get our moms back for this prank. Our parents got together once a month to play cards, so that October, we made sure we were around for card night. We waited until our fathers went for a beer run, which inevitably meant an hour or 2 at the bar. We told our moms about a legend we had heard about a sad ghost that could be seen weeping at her husband's grave when the moonlight hit. We made this story up and convinced them to take us to see it. My cousin secretly called his best friend, who had agreed to go there in a mask and hide to scare them. The prank worked perfectly, and our mothers nearly peed themselves. We all laughed hardly as we went back to our car. When we got to it, the car would not start. We laughed some more about the ghost sabotaging it and decided to walk where my cousin's friend had hidden his car. We would send our dads to get the car later, but of course, his car would not start either. We started to feel a little weird about this since neither car had problems recently. But what could we do? This was before everyone had cell phones, so we started walking towards the closest house, which was about a mile or 2 away. Though none of us knew them well, we knew the name of the people who lived there. As we walked up their long driveway, we started to worry because there were no cars parked by the house, and it looked pretty dark inside. We knocked anyway, but got no answer. We were about to leave, not having nearly as much fun thinking we would have to walk the long distance to the next house, when we heard voices coming from the back of the house. We went to the backyard looking for the people we heard, but it was pretty dark and nobody was around. We yelled hello a few times and identified ourselves, but got no answer. The backyard had a fair amount of trees, and suddenly, large branches started falling. This scared us since there was no apparent cause. In just a few seconds, at least a dozen branches bigger than your arm fell from the 5 or 6 trees closest to us. It was utterly crazy. We all ran for it. We were around the end of the driveway. My cousin screamed and pointed towards the house. It looked like several pairs of red eyes were peering around the house at us. We ran straight back to our car and tried it again. It started no problem. We did not stop at my cousin's friend's car. We went right back to the house. Later that night, my uncle and dad and cousin took his friend back and got his car, which also started on the first try. When they drove past the house, it looked completely normal, and there was a car in the driveway. We have never been sure if the people there saw us mucking about in the graveyard and decided to prank the pranksters, or if it was something else. If it was a prank, they put it together awfully fast and never laughingly confessed. We felt too foolish to ask. It was in 1971. I was in my late 20s. I was then staying in Rose Hill, in a different country, not married yet and staying at my folks'. One day, my dad came home with a South African couple. He met them while coming back home, and they were tourists visiting Mauritius with their bags, tents, and sleeping bags. Mauritius was still safe in that period, but independence was given by Great Britain in 1968, and a civil war had just come to an end a few months before. 2 communities had fought for some political reasons. Anyway, my dad invited them home to sleep over for a few days. I remember the guy had a big blonde beard. He was very kind. His wife was as well, but I forgot her face. We decided to organize camping during a weekend on the west coast of Mauritius. This place, which is now pretty developed, was at the time very wild with just a few houses. We went on a Saturday morning, found a nice place to put a tent, and organized the day. The South African man and his wife were very good swimmers and divers. We spent a lot of time in the sea, catching fish, crabs, some lobsters, which were getting scarce then. We don't find them anywhere by the coast, and cooked all these goodies on a small homemade barbecue set. All of us, Mom, Dad, the couple and I, really enjoyed the day. The sunset was beautiful. It was warm. We were in summer, and everything was perfect. When night came, we prepared a nice barbecue with chicken, beef, and pork, and a few shrimps we had caught earlier. The night was starry. My dad was happy and drunk, and the couple was obviously having a great time. Since we were not fluent in English, I was improving then. Communication was a bit difficult, but we could make ourselves understand with gestures and sometimes drawing on the sand. It was a great fun seeing my dad, trying to converse with them with a very limited knowledge of English. Anyway, it must have been around 9 p.m. We were all seated on the beach, watching the ocean as well as the starry sky by the campfire. It was so beautiful. Then we started to hear like a complaint. We couldn't determine the origin of the sound, but it was like a woman wailing. It was faint, but clear, since the place was wild and remote. The wailing was not constant, but would be heard from time to time. We put it on the sound of some sorts of animal, since we were not people living on the coast, thus being ignorant of animals which could be active at night. We were seated on the beach, facing the ocean, when suddenly we noticed someone coming out from the sea on our left at about 30 to 40 meters away. It looked like a woman with a long white dress, just walking from the sea to the beach. We could not see her face, but could guess she had long hair. The only lights were the stars and our bonfire. She silently walked straight and disappeared from our view in the vegetation. We found this very odd. I knew it was not normal, but did not know what the others were thinking. My dad was drunk and watched the scene with a little smile on his face. I think he was lost in his thoughts. We all looked at each other and did not know what to think. I tried to check if there was a house where the woman walked to. I just stood up and walked towards the sea and looked on my left to see where she went. There was only green, bush, and trees. There were no lights or any constructions around. I was now scared because I was realizing that we must have seen a ghost. I walked back to the bonfire and sat and told everyone that I did not find any house there. We stopped talking and everyone kept alert. We could now hear all the little noises of the night. We heard faint crackling, like someone or an animal quietly walking on dry leaves. Then, suddenly, we heard loud flapping noises on a tree nearby. It looked like large birds, pigeons or bats, flying away. It scared us. Then my mom told me quietly she felt that something was not right, and I and she were feeling watched. The couple was looking around with their glass in their hands. Then, suddenly, something heavy fell in front of us on the beach at about 5 or 6 meters. I stood up to see what it was, but could not find anything. Everybody stood up and looked around. Nothing was found. Despite the fact that the night was clear and sweet, the atmosphere had changed, apart from my father, who was in a trip because he was too drunk. We were all scared by then. The couple talked between them, and I could not understand. They seemed quite concerned about the situation. I did not know what to do. Could we stay there, or maybe go to sleep, or maybe we had to leave? That was a pity. We were enjoying such a nice time before seeing that woman. Then, in the middle of the night, we heard this bone-chilling scream, like a woman being attacked. It seemed close to our camp. We were on our feet, with eyes about to pop out from our sockets. My heart was pounding so loud that I thought others could hear it. The couple started to pick up their stuff, and my dad followed them. Mom and I packed away everything quickly. As we were doing so, some coconuts fell and rolled on our camp as if someone had thrown them away. We were now scared to death, and no one would talk. We heard running on the beach, then in the woods, but could not see anything. We quickly put stuff in the car, and it was not easy because we did not have a big car, and we had taken time to pack things so that they could fit in when we came down. Now we had to pile up things. The worst was the barbecue. It was hot and dirty, and we did not want to leave it. I burnt myself twice
while trying to put it away. While we were packing away, things were happening around us. The screams seemed to originate from different places, and there was a lot of noises going on. We all got into the car practically one upon the other with stuff on us. I decided to take the wheel because my dad was too drunk. As we moved away, we got a shock. We saw a woman dressed in white standing by the little lane, looking at us. It was bone-chilling. I stopped the car. She was standing about 4 to 5 meters away. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to move closer to her, but it was the only way out. We waited a few minutes as she was standing there, staring at us. I heard my mom praying and the South African couple mumbling something between them. Suddenly, we heard a bang, like something hit the car behind. We all turned to see what had happened. The atmosphere was very tense, and I think my dad was becoming sober very quickly. He was now swearing. We did not see anything behind, but when I looked forward, the woman was not there anymore. But the scariest thing happened. She was now standing by my door, looking at me. I can't describe the utter fear which took hold of me then. I released a scream. My throat was sore several days after, and pushed the gas pedal. I think everybody screamed then, but with panic, the car choked and the woman was still there, looking at us. I remember not seeing her eyes or features because it was dark. I switched on the car again and drove off as fast as I could. The poor car got shaken on the dirt road. We reached the main road, relieved and shouting. What the hell had we seen and experienced? Fortunately, Rose Hill is not far from that area we were just at. But when we reached the town, the car broke down. The fan belt of the car had broken and the engine stopped from overheating. We were in the 70s, no cell or anything like towing services available a Saturday evening. The couple and my mom walked home, which was not far. My dad and I stayed by the car. At home, Mom phoned a friend of my dad, who was not staying far, to tow away our car. We finally reached home at around 11:30 p.m., completely exhausted. My dad's friend who had helped us was invited to have coffee, and we told him what had happened. He said that we were lucky because there had been accounts of people walking to the sea, like being in a trance and never coming back, getting drowned by possession, really scary and unbelievable. Some would be hurt by objects being thrown at them. A woman apparently lost her baby while being pregnant. She was a few weeks away from delivery, but after coming to that place and seeing the ghost, she had pain in her tummy and started to bleed a few hours later. She had to go through surgery where they noted that the baby had died. These events would not always happen, but would take place randomly. The South African couple stayed 2 more days at home and left. We never heard or saw from them afterwards. I later discovered that there was a cemetery on the other side of the road. Not too close to the road, though. I never knew who that woman, ghost, was, but it seemed that regularly she would come out of the ocean and walk to the cemetery. However, in the late 80s, there was no accounts of seeing her up to today. My brothers and I have been living in our townhouse for 8 years now, ever since I entered college and my brothers entered high school in an exclusive school in Quezon City, Philippines. Our townhouse is only a 10-minute walk away from the school, which is very convenient for us. However, because our family business is in the province, my parents have to live there, while my brothers and I live in our townhouse alone. Several incidents happened in our house, which we chose to ignore. In one instance, when my dad paid us a visit, he and my brother were in the kitchen. My brother was washing dishes, while my dad was chopping vegetables for lunch. They were both facing the wall, their heads turned away from the door leading to the washroom at the end of the kitchen. From behind them, they heard my voice say, "May I use the restroom?" My brother answered back, "What's wrong with you?" Because he was surprised I was asking permission in our own house. They both turned around and saw no one. They checked the bathroom. It was empty. They went around the house. I wasn't there. I received a call in myself from my brother that day, asking where I was. I was at work the entire time. But my brother and father were both certain it was my voice they heard. Now, the second incident was more creepy, because I myself experienced it. I was leaving for work. My youngest brother was already in school, while my younger brother was in his room. I stepped out the door and stood by the front steps, locking the door with my keys. Suddenly, I heard my voice in the living room calling my brother's name. "Rap, come down here." I fumbled my keys and tried to open the door, except this time, the locks won't open. I heard my brother running down the stairs, so I went to the window to see what will happen. The living room was empty. My brother opened the door for me and asked why I was calling him. I told him it wasn't me calling him, and he couldn't believe it. After telling the story again, I left him to go to work. The third incident happened in my room, more than a year after the second incident. I woke up in the middle of the night, which always happens to me. The first thing I did is check my bedside clock, which I always check when I wake up in the middle of the night for comparison. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. At the corner of my bed is a full-length mirror, which normally faces and reflects the image of my bedroom door. After checking my clock, I checked my mirror and saw myself standing and staring at myself in a deadpan way. At first I thought I was looking at my reflection, and I even asked myself in my mind, why the hell am I sleeping standing up? But then I felt the bed, and I knew I was lying down. After a few seconds of staring at my standing reflection, I turned to the other side of the bed and decided just to ignore it. The last incident did not happen to me, but to my youngest brother, who has always been in touch with the supernatural. It happened just last year, in 2007. According to him, he woke up at 5 a.m. and took a bath for school. While getting dressed, he noticed that his reflection in the mirror was grinning at him, though he wasn't smiling at all. He got terrified and decided to go to school, though it was too early. When he was locking the door, he practically screamed when he saw his own head grinning at him from his right shoulder. He walked to school, the whole time with the grinning face that looks like him on his shoulder, which he could see through his peripheral vision. On the way to school, he passed by some shops and saw his reflection still grinning at him. He noted that although his reflection looks like him exactly, the eyes were somewhat different. My brother chose to ignore the doppelganger, who stayed with him at school the whole day. A doppelganger of my classmate. It was Saturday morning. Some of our classmates, including me, were tasked to go to the school to finish our beautification project. We were done exactly at 11 a.m. All of our classmates, excluding Trisha, Karen, Ariana, and me, went home. Ariana told us to wait here at school while she will go and buy something to eat. She didn't eat any breakfast. So we agreed, and we waited for her. Since there's nothing much to do, we decided to go on ghost hunting. We went up to the second floor and began filming all around us with Trisha's phone while walking. As we passed by the library, we all felt a very cold wind around us. Trisha screamed, "Run!" Then we ran outside the gate and we saw the guard. The guard is very angry with us, and so he tells us to go home. We text Ariana to go to my place after she is done eating. At my place, we replayed the video. As the film passes by the library's glass window, we saw Karen's reflection wearing a blue t-shirt in front of Trisha. Trisha was so shocked and said, "Wait, you're at my back, right? And are you wearing a white t-shirt back there?" Karen said, "Yes. Why will I be in front? Clearly you're the one who is in front, right? And I'm still wearing the exact same white t-shirt." We tried to replay it again and again, and still the same. I really want to know what you think, because I'm still baffled by this whole situation. If anybody has any idea as to what this could be, please put it in the comments below. D is for doppelganger. As would be expected, a lot has happened since I was last on here. In due time, I'll explain my absence. But for now, I'll start with what is troubling me the most. I have been with my partner, whom we'll call Michael for privacy reasons, for nearly a year now, and this started happening in November of 2012. Now, before I delve into it, at all times when these sightings have occurred, he has not been on any medication, drugs of any kind, nor had he been consuming alcohol. To better understand the story, I better give you a layout of the house. Walk through the front door, you are greeted by the dining room, with an open plan kitchen at the end of it. Take 4 steps forward, and to your left you have the lounge, which is connected to the dining room by 2 doors which are kept open at all times. Next to the lounge is a small extension of the house, which is Michael's little sister's playroom. The playroom is separated from the dining room by a glass wall and a glass door. Keep walking straight from the front door, and to your right is a door leading to the garage and laundry room. Next to the laundry door is the hallway. The hallway is L-shaped, and the first room to your right is his mother's and sister's room. Go to the corner of the L, and you'll find the main bedroom, which his grandmother resides in. At the corner of the L, and slightly off to the right, is Michael's room, and at the very end of the L is the bathroom. Michael has been seeing my doppelganger. The appearances have been happening generally once or twice a month, and it was usually just out of the corner of his eye. My doppelganger has usually been seen in and around his room and up and down the hallway. After grilling him for details, I found out that before these sightings, he would always get a whiff of my perfume that I tend to always wear. Now, the sightings have only ever been at his house, and no one in his family has my perfume, and none of my clothing is actually at his house. Doppelganger seems to have my sense of style down to a fine art, as it has always been seen wearing my usual attire. Michael has always picked up a feeling of sadness every time he's seen my doppelganger. Now, here's where it picks up a notch. A few months back in June, I was on the phone with Michael when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence and everything went dead quiet. Thinking something happened, I immediately got worried and asked what was wrong. All I got in reply was very frightened whispers. Getting slightly frustrated, I asked yet again what was wrong. Michael finally told me he was seeing my doppelganger. I then got very worried as he was very frightened. I asked Michael what happened, and he said he had been walking around the dining room table talking to me when, out of the corner of his eyes, he saw someone sitting on the couch in the lounge. All his family had retired to bed for the day, so he was very surprised. As he turned to face it, he saw that it was my doppelganger, clear as day, casually sitting on the couch. Scaring the bejesus out of him, he ran into the playroom. My doppelganger then proceeded to get up from the couch, walk towards the kitchen, and, from what Michael heard, as he couldn't see at this point, get a glass of water. No glass was ever found as proof of this, by the way. As I calmed him down over the phone, I asked him if he got any vibe from the doppelganger. He said he picked up an obvious negative vibe, not in a menacing way, just down and unhappy. He also said it looked like my doppelganger was in pain. Can doppelgangers even feel pain? Now, I definitely know Michael wasn't bluffing to me, as this happened over the phone, and no one can fake the kind of fear that was in his voice. Another thing to note is the doppelganger had brown hair, whereas I have dyed my naturally brown hair blonde. That seems to be the last sighting of it he's had for a while. What happened? Help would be greatly appreciated here, as I am going out of my mind with questions. What is this thing? What does it want? Why imitate me? No one else in his family has seen it other than Michael. Thank you for reading. Doppelgangers, oh my. I can't say I've ever seen a doppelganger. However, some of my family members have. 2010. At this time, the family members residing in our home were our oldest daughter and her husband, our youngest son, and our youngest daughter. My husband saw the first one sometime in 2010. He came home from work at midnight. I was asleep on the couch in the living room. He was on his way through our room to the bathroom to take a shower when he saw our youngest daughter sitting at my computer. He called out to her. She didn't answer or even move. He assumed she had earphones in and didn't hear him. He realized he had forgotten to grab a towel from the laundry room, so he turned around and headed that way. Our bedroom is on one end of the house. The laundry is on the opposite end. He walked down the hall, though the dining room and the kitchen were in between. Just as he was about to open the laundry room door, M, our youngest daughter, stepped out. My husband asked if she had just been on my computer. She said no, she had been in the laundry room this entire time. We all picked at him about getting old and seeing things. That's before I did some research on doppelgangers. Shortly after my husband saw our youngest daughter's doppelganger, our youngest son saw mine. This happened about 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening. I had just finished cooking dinner and was waiting for my family to come home, except our youngest son Z, who had gone into work about an hour before. I decided to do some laundry while I waited. I always had to keep myself busy when I was home alone. I still had the notion that if I was doing something there, was less of a chance for me to encounter anything ghostly. Plus, staying busy made the time go by faster. I was in the laundry room when the door shut, when I felt or maybe heard someone come into the house. And as a side note, there is absolutely no way anyone could ever come into my house without me knowing it, whether I'm awake or asleep. When our kids were younger, they used to try to fool me. Never happened. I can feel the least change in air pressure drove them crazy. I asked, "Who is here?" Z answered me and said his new manager sent him home to shave because he had a 5 o'clock shadow. He was fussing about as he went down the hall into the bathroom. I stayed in the laundry room folding clothes. We have never kept our clothes in our bedrooms. I have a huge laundry room, so everything clothing-wise is kept there. Oddly enough, I was folding Z's clothes when I heard, "Mom, why are you putting those in my room?" I opened the laundry room door, walked out into the kitchen just as Z walked into the dining room from the hall. The look on his face frightened me. It looked as if he had just seen a ghost. I watched as all color drained from his face. I asked him if he was okay. He just stared at me. After about a minute, he snapped out of his trance. The following is what he told me. He was standing in front of the bathroom mirror shaving when he heard a shuffle. He looked up and out the door. He saw me dressed in a red robe, walking really fast, holding a stack of clothes. I entered his bedroom, so he stepped out of the bathroom to ask me what I was doing. I didn't come from the direction of the laundry room. I came from the opposite end of the house, from the other bedrooms. His is the first bedroom in the hall before you get to the bathroom. I did own a red robe at that time. However, I was fully dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Nothing red. Before that day, Z was a non-believer of the paranormal. For years he swore he still was. He refused to talk about that day. About a year ago, he and his wife bought a house built in 1940. He's now coming around to the fact that there are some things that have no other explanation. Last week, April 22nd, 2016, my oldest daughter was visiting. She and I were laying on my bed talking. I fell asleep. She got up to get a drink from the kitchen. As she was leaving my room, she saw M's, the youngest daughter, boyfriend coming from her bedroom, which is directly across from mine. She said he had a faraway look in his eyes. He was laughing as if something he and M had shared moments before was extremely funny. He walked down the hall into the bathroom and shut the door. S continued on to the kitchen. She got her drink and started back down the hall. As she was right outside of the closed bathroom door, she noticed Jay was stepping out of M's bedroom. He looked as if he was half asleep. He asked her if someone was in the bathroom, to which she replied, "You." She reached over and opened the bathroom door. It was empty. It was the vacation of a lifetime. Just my best friend Nicole and I going away to Ireland. I was very excited as we were going to stay in a famous castle, which of course had some history of its own. I believe it was Capra Castle, of something to that effect. I recalled as it was yesterday. We were in rooms number 71. We left our room to go through the courtyard to the main castle for dinner. We then proceeded to go look for this haunted bridge or something. We made a few jokes about how we were going to hang each other from the bridge. We had a bit of fun with that, hit the bar, and then went back towards our room. After returning, our luggage was messed up on the floor. We thought nothing of it. Could it have been the maid for all we know? I'm not sure. But we noticed that the dog that went around the hotel courtyard was outside of our room. Was an Irish wolfhound. So we got to bed about an hour or so after we had got back, and we locked the door, and the dog got up and went away. So it was now about 1 a.m. I was sleeping through the night, and around 3 a.m., I had a rude awakening. I started freaking out because I felt like someone was on top of me, and that I was being scratched at. I was freaking out, and I started screaming and moving around, and I was hitting Nicole, trying to wake her up. I felt that my face was bleeding and could taste the blood. I was in a state of panic. I managed to get Nicole up, and she was trying to calm me down. I was telling her I was bleeding and to get help right away. As she felt my face, she felt the blood. She was in shock. So she said she would turn on the light and call the desk for help. She reached for the phone and light, which were right by one another, and she got, as she described, brutally pushed aside, hitting her head on the floor. She reached for her pocket keychain light to search for the light. She crawled over to the light switch and came running back to the bed, where I was still feeling as if I was pinned down. She got on the bed to check on me, and I felt as if I could freely move up. So I sit up. I was feeling pinned down this whole time, hence my freaking out. She checked me for blood, and there was no sign of blood. We went to open the door and checked to see if there was any sign of forced entry into our hotel room in case it was something else. There we saw the dog walk back to the front of our door, and he laid down there. We couldn't get back to sleep after all of that. The whole thing freaked me out, and I'm not sure why exactly that did happen. Why was the dog back after the attack? Why could I taste blood and then be fine? I couldn't move, and I did not shove Nicole off the bed. It was one of the most freaky experiences ever. Did I anger a spirit and they were being spiteful? This isn't my first encounter with strange beings, just the more physical. Woodsford Castle. I've had a few weird experiences, but this is by far the scariest. Me, my sister, my parents, and my grandparents all went and stayed in a natural trust place called Woodsford Castle. It was really old-fashioned with the decapitated stags and stuff mounted on the wall along with chandeliers. In the visitor's book, there was loads of questions about whether the castle was haunted or not. The room me and my sister stayed in was the oldest room in the castle. It was always quite dark and cold in the room, even if we had the lights on, and you always got a chilled, prickly feeling when you were in there alone. Whenever I went into the room, I felt a huge urge to leave and felt like someone was trying to make me get out. One night, I went to the toilet, and as I was coming back up the stairs, I heard footsteps clicking up the steps, which sounded like high-heeled boots. This confused me a bit, but I passed it off as my imagination and walked back to the room me and my sister were staying in. When I opened the door, I saw someone standing over my sister. It wasn't any of my family because they all denied being awake at that time. I couldn't see what she looked like because she was mainly a shadow, but all I could really see was what looked like a long dress, suggesting she was a woman. As I walked into the room, there was a sudden chill, and the woman vanished. I told my mom, who was a real believer of spirits, and she said that the woman may have wanted me out of the room so she could be with my sister alone. But we don't know why she wanted my sister. We were all really scared and left a day early because we didn't feel safe. If anyone has any idea why this woman wanted my sister alone, it would be really helpful to know. Castle Leslie haunting. So I just got home from a 2-night stay at Castle Leslie in Co. I was aware that there was reported hauntings prior to going out, but did not want to read any stories before I went, and my wife was totally unaware of any stories relating to the castle. We stayed in Norman's room, and a series of events happened between 1 a.m. and first light, which would have been around 5 or 6 a.m.-ish. The night is in question was Monday night, Tuesday morning, the 4th and 5th of April, 2016. Firstly, we returned to the room around 12 a.m., and we both were very tired after the drive up from Wexford. I was awoken, and I could feel a presence in the room, and I could make out the figure of a man sitting in the chair next to the bed. The hair was standing on the back of my neck, and I couldn't move. I then saw what I can only describe as a mist cloud over the right-hand side of the bed. I had a restless night of dreams. One of those was a dream of being in the bed, and others which I can't recall. It was very warm in the room, and I was too scared to move or even hang my leg outside the covers. In the morning, my wife confirmed she too had a night of vivid dreams and awoke to see a cloud of mist at the foot of my bed. No windows in the room were open. I was glad to see the morning and went to the bathroom. Our room overlooked the vast gardens and lake, and whilst looking out over the lake, it looked like a wave or wall of water around 10 feet was moving across very slowly. My wife confirmed the same, but by the time I got my camera to take the picture, it had disappeared. The following night, we told the night porter our experience, and he mentioned that there were reports of the bed being haunted and offered to move us into another room. Nothing like this has happened before, and I would say I was open-minded, yet very skeptical. We had a sound sleep on Tuesday night with the help of a different set of spirits. I can't explain what we saw, and we will return there one day, but won't be staying in Norman's room. An audible manifestation. My only ghostly experience came in the fall of 1986. I had lost most of my vision from diabetes and had entered a residential rehabilitation facility in the capital city of a southern state. Rumors had been shared among clients about odd things that occurred on the campus that encompassed an entire city block. Because many clients came to the rehabilitation facility with secondary medical complications, there had been cases of clients passing on in their dormitory rooms. Odd things had been reported, such as the elevator engaging and moving from one floor to the other, when only one person, the business officer manager, sat in his office in the administration building. More than once, he had charged out of his office into the elevator doors to see who was coming from the second floor, but the elevator was always empty when the doors slid open. That to me could be easily explained as an electrical glitch versus something paranormal. But that same office manager was in the small first floor reception area of the training hall with two men who were hired as security guards during the week-long Christmas closure. One of the guards was a regular member of maintenance, and the other a part-time staff member, and both fully knowledgeable about the entire campus. The clients and all staff had departed except for these three men. They stood quietly, chatting when they all heard a sound. It sounded like someone had dragged a heavy pile of furniture across the floor, directly over their heads. They rushed to the second floor, but nothing was moved or out of place. This they could not explain. My experience took place in the hall, where my room, along with 3 other rooms, were located. There was a fire stairway at one end of the short hall that led either upstairs to the women's second-floor dorm rooms or outdoors and into the courtyard. Double swinging doors on the other end of that hall opened into the first-floor women's lounge and then either led out the courtyard or through a second set of swinging doors that led to the counseling hall. It was a Friday night, and I had just finished supper. Using my white crane, I made my way out of the cafeteria, into the training hall's reception area, and down through the hall, up the short set of stairs, and through the counseling hall. I passed through the first set of swinging doors and walked across the first floor of women's lounge and through the second set of doors and into my hall. My room was the first door on the left. The hall was very short, and you needed to take only one step to cross the hall to the door directly across from mine. I removed my door key and, using my left hand, located the keyhole and just begun to insert the key with my right hand when I heard 5 taps on the door across the hall from my own. It sounded like someone tapped with just one finger. I straightened my position and spun on my heels, feeling somewhat foolish for not having realized that there was someone in the hall with me. I said a pleasant hello, but received no answer. I could only imagine the look on my face when no response came. Finally, and shrugging my shoulders, I turned my back to my own door. As I was again about to insert my key into the slot, a thought struck me. Knowing that it was a habit for all diabetics to be housed on the first floor in the event of needing assistance quickly for low blood sugar, I again turned to the door across from mine. My thought was that perhaps one of the 2 ladies sharing the room had knocked from the inside and was in need of help. I took the one step necessary to reach their door. In a loose fist, I raised my hand to knock on their door, but before I could, I again heard the 5 taps on the door, but this time there was no question that those taps came from my side of their door and that I was the only person standing in the hall. Then I heard one of the ladies in that room say, "Yes, someone is at the door. See who it is." Well, when they opened the door, there I was standing transfixed with my right hand still in the air as if to knock. When they asked what I might need, it took me a moment until I found my voice. I knew what just had happened and was trying to process what I knew had just happened, but was finding it difficult to admit that I knew in my heart what I knew, that someone or something had tapped on the door right beside me. I finally was able to explain what I had heard from inside the hall, the 2 sets of 5 taps on the door. They both said they heard the taps too. We stood there puzzled when I burst out laughing. I was still not ready to face the reality of what I had known I had heard. I said, "Oh, I know. Your guard dog was leaning against the door and scratch, which caused the tapping sounds." "But," one lady said, "neither of us have a guide dog." She replicated the tapping sound exactly as we all heard it. I know those tappings came from the hall side of their door. The sound was not a foot to my right and at eye level as I stood there. Had it been a real person, we would have been all but touching shoulders. Together, we 3 ladies attempted to replicate the sound by going through the swinging doors, opening and closing the stairwell door, and even the doors leading out into the courtyard from the women's lounge. We could not replicate those tappings, no matter what we tried, and despite not having vision, I slept that night with all my room's lights on. The following Monday, As I walked to the administration building, I caught up with the director of vocational training. I asked her if, to her knowledge, anyone had ever passed on that floor. She said that yes, years before, an older woman who once occupied one of the rooms on the far right side of the women's lounge had gone to lay down after a double period of orientation and mobility, instruction for using a white cane, and had expired in her sleep. When I explained what we three ladies had experienced that Friday night, she made me vow that I would never share the story with other clients so as not to frighten them. I know what I heard. I know what we three ladies heard. I have no rational explanation except to speculate that the former, and now departed, client was visiting one of her fellow dormies in my hall. As far as I know, all the action started after our dog Max died in August of 2000. He didn't leave us for quite a while. In the early morning when we needed to go outside, he would come to the edge of the bed, take his head, and lift my husband's hand to wake him. He would do this quite often after he died. We would feel him jump up on the bed and walk around. We have a 3-bedroom home, and when our grandson came to spend the night, he would sleep in this particular room with his papa. One night, while he was in bed to go to sleep, he got up and went to his papa. He told him that he heard a dog sniffing in the room. That settled it for me as far as it was not our imagination. My husband would see him walk around the house until finally, one day, he was gone. However, there were other things that were happening during this time. While I was asleep, in the bedroom I mentioned, I was awakened to someone taking their finger and tracing my lips. When I opened my eyes and looked, it looked like vines all entwined. There were limbs, as if they could be arms, and I felt that one of them had traced my lips. I knew if I blinked, it would go away, and it did. There have been things that would be moved and go missing, only to show up again later, when I would sit on the couch during this time. Every night someone would stroke my hair as I sat on the couch watching TV. It seems there's a lot of activity in the laundry room. Also, we have heard on several occasions someone come in and out of the home from the garage. We have a wooden screen door there, and the screen doors slam. What is strange about this is, when we let it slam, it will bounce and the door jam several times. When it is slammed by a ghost, it does not bounce any. The garage door is closed, and no one came into the garage to do this, and no one else is in the home. I keep the laundry basket in the laundry room closet, and one evening, I was sorting clothes to do laundry. I thought my husband came in and squeezed my butt. I let out a scream because it startled me, and turned around to tell him not to do that. No one was there, and when I looked out the door, he was in the kitchen. There was no way he could have done this and got back to the kitchen in time. My granddaughter spent the night one night. One night I was in my office doing some work, and I'd left a TV on in the great room. I kept thinking to myself that I needed to go turn down the TV. After the second time I thought this, I heard several loud noises. Since my husband was in bed, I thought he had gotten up mad because the TV was loud and turned it down, and plus, slamming the bedroom door. It did not sound like a slam, but that was the thought that passed in my mind. When I went to look, the TV was down so low, you could barely even hear it. I asked my husband the next morning if he had gotten up to turn down the TV, and he said no. A couple of weeks ago, early one Saturday morning, no one was up, and I heard the noises again. I did not get up to investigate, since I knew they were at it again. I'm sure it isn't finished. Until next time. Looking back, there are a bunch of stories I could tell, but I'll pick out a couple spanning different stages of my life. I remember this one with clarity, as if it happened this morning. I was laying in bed when I was about 7 or so. It was a Saturday morning. Strange that I remember that. I opened my eyes, and at the bottom of my bed was my grandpa, except that he was transparent. I could see the lines of him. It was very detailed, like a pencil sketch, but he was completely see-through. He was distinctly talking to me. I could see his mouth opening and closing, like he was trying to tell me something really important. Then his face started getting bigger and bigger, as if he was getting closer, but he wasn't. And he kept getting more and more animated, and the way he was trying to tell me, whatever it was that he was trying to tell me, I freaked out and took off. Never figured out what he was saying, but it was pretty cool to see him. So many things happened in that home. None of it was particularly disturbing or anything. We would see people ducking into our playroom and closets. A kid in a yellow dress was the most frequent one. Locked cabinet doors would open by themselves, but it wasn't remotely disturbing. My mom woke to find an angel sitting on her bed once. Very cool. Fast forward 25 years, skipping a ton of stories. We had our first baby. She was about 4 months old, and we had just moved her to her room from ours. In the middle of the night, as I was drifting off to sleep, a woman's voice literally yelled in my ear, like she was right next to me, "Get up." Needless to say, I did, and I ran into my baby's room and checked her breathing and woke her up. I don't know for a fact that something was going on, but I'm pretty sure the woman prevented something bad from happening. I've heard her several times since, and I appreciate her help. I don't know who it is, though. We now live in PA, in a house that from time to time appears to get kind of active. It isn't consistent, and seemed to happen more when we first moved in. It seemed like we had ghost kids with us. We would hear kids whispering in our ears from time to time, as if they were right next to us. See them upstairs in the hall, hear them giggle, hear a kid say "Mommy," "Daddy" from the stairs. Once our kids are asleep, even my daughter is asked who keeps walking by our door when it's not us. Again, nothing scary or disturbing, but kinda interesting, I suppose. Thank you for listening. I have so many of these, especially from the Virginia days as a kid. Keep up the good work. As I told you before, my name is Vanessa, and my family and I used to live in a haunted house. We would listen to the radio in the mornings while we were getting ready for school, and it would shut off. So one morning, we didn't turn it on, and it came on. We turned it off, and it still came on. My dad, who didn't believe in ghosts at the time, used to come home, and all the dishes in the kitchen would be out of the cabinets, and we would get in trouble, until one night, he was there alone, and was woken up by a noise in the kitchen. He walked to the kitchen in total darkness.
and saw something blacker than the dark and about 4 feet tall. He turns and goes back to bed and puts the covers up to his eyes, and whatever it was turned and went to his room. It walked up to the end of his bed and looked at him for a minute and turned and went back to the kitchen. He has seen a little girl looking over his stepson one night. So many things have happened in there. That's really all I have to share. I know it's short, but I hope you enjoyed. I've had a handful of previous experiences with ghosts, but the most memorable happened in April of this year. Growing up, I had a favorite aunt and uncle. My aunt was the one who spent time with all the kids, took us to fun places like the zoo, and encouraged those of us with a creative side to develop that. We shared a love of cooking and sewing. She and my uncle took me in for a few weeks when I was about 24, and trying to save a dying early marriage. She lost a 2.5-year battle with cancer in April at age 77. My husband and I attended her memorial service a few weeks later. Just as her very close family entered the church and took their seats up front, I saw her. My husband was sitting at my right, and she was on the other side of him. She disappeared after a few seconds, but I had a very intense feeling that she was still there for another few seconds after that. This was totally unexpected, but very comforting. I've not yet told this to my uncle or cousins. They live some distance away, but will at some time. Many of my own family do not believe in ghosts, thus my hesitation at revealing my experience. A second, very recent possible experience involves my 23-month-old grandson, Luke. His father was killed when he was about 10 months old. Although my daughter and her children no longer live in the same place, recently, Luke refuses to go into the kitchen in their new house when it is dark. He appears to be very frightened of something. We wonder if it might be his dad, and he's checking on him. I was the caretaker of the Royal Academy of Dance in Battersea, southwest London. I was locking up one night, and on walking through the top floor, I noticed a man in fireman's gear walking across the studio. When I switched the light back on, this person had somehow vanished. Another time, I was walking through the first floor and heard the sound of the piano going off in the studio, and someone walking around as well. So I walked in, and the music stopped. No one was in there. When I turned the lights off and left, that same piano started playing again. I was walking around the third floor another night when I heard a voice say, "Help me," really clearly. Not thinking anything of it, I shouted that no one is allowed to be here. That was when I realized that I was the only one in the building. What's interesting is that I took a medium around the building, and she actually collapsed in the downstairs studio, Studio 10. She said that there was a man hanging in the corner of the room. I've been around with a mate with night vision cameras and meters. We found large orbs in Studio 10 on the ground floor, which were dancing around me. We have film of them. And on the top floor, we filmed a very large flashlight on camera. To the naked eye, nothing was there. Well, anyway, that's all I have to share. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this experience. I live in a 2-story duplex on Cloverleaf for 16 years. I loved this house very much until one day, things started to change. My dad died in the house in the kitchen when I was 3 years old. When I was in middle school, my 2 friends would come stay at my house for the weekend so they could see all of their friends. Then my best friend's brother started to talk about Ouija boards and praying to Satan to possess him. When my mother found out, she refused to let him back to our house. Shortly after not talking to them anymore, that's when things got more interesting. I would invite friends to come have a sleepover, and when we would walk up the stairs, they would start freaking out and saying that there was something wrong with the home and would want to go home. I started to become more frightened, and the more frightened I got, the more I saw. I started to see my dead father standing behind me in the bathroom mirror, and I saw him sitting on my mother's bed. I felt someone hug me and say I love you. My mother and sister started to see light rods shooting across my deaf brother's bedroom. He would sit up late at night laughing and staring at something in his room. One day, I saw a man inside my brother's room by his bed. This man was in dark clothing and had dark hair. I believe that my bedroom was the main place for these spirits in the house. My bedroom door would not open, and it was not locked. One night, before we moved, I was sleeping and got woken up to voices and noises and objects coming off the shelves. I heard 2 women's voices outside my bedroom window that was 2 stories up. They were saying, "Should we get her?" Right after that, I saw the door rattling as if someone was trying to get in. In the hallway, I heard a loud noise. It sounded like a train going down the hallway. Things in my closet were falling off the shelves, and the hangers were swaying back and forth. I tried to wake my daughter's father, but he would not wake up. I was so scared. I felt a cold draft go down my back. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend nothing was happening. I opened my eyes and saw a light rod moving like a wave in the corner behind my door. I got out of bed and ran into my mother's room, and she was still asleep. All I could hear was my brother laughing. The nightlight in the hallway was flickering. The next day I woke up, and on the back of my bedroom door shaped in the wood grain was a man's face with a beard and a helmet from the medieval days. That face was never there before. That morning, my next door neighbor was walking across his living room and cut his foot on a metal teardrop shape. It burnt a hole in the carpet, and it didn't come from the ceiling. We have no idea where and how it got there. After all the incidents that happened to that house, we felt it was best to move. To this day, when I drive by the Cloverleaf house, I get chills and feel scared, like as if whatever is in this house is still waiting. When I lived with my parents, my bedroom was next door to my nanny's room. She lived with us into her late 90s and died in her bed of natural causes with her family around her. Even before my nanny's death, her room had always been associated with strange going-ons. When I was 11, I stood outside the bathroom and heard my mother talking to someone. When I opened the door, she was on her own. I asked her what she was doing, and she told me that she was talking to her ghost, but not to worry, as it didn't mean us any harm. I asked her what it said, and she said that it was a man who whispered her name, often when she was upset, so she found it comforting. Feeling left out when my parents went shopping and left me in the house alone, I stood at the top of the stairs and told the ghost that I wanted it to contact me so that I could help it in any way I could. I didn't tell my parents, and nothing happened that day. The day after, however, when I'd forgotten all about it and was packing my suitcase to go on a trip, I heard a man whisper my name very gently. I knew my parents were downstairs. I froze, and I can still remember the goosebumps that rose in my body. Then the voice, a little louder this time, repeated my name, and I shot down the stairs with a speed I never know I possessed. This incident opened a door that is never completely shut. To this day, I regret offering the ghost my help and being too scared to follow through. But this wasn't the last time we heard of him. My mother and I often heard something thudding down the stairs at night. Later we found out that prior to us living there, a sick man had lived and died in my nanny's room, and while he was alive, he used to bump down the stairs on his bottom as he couldn't walk very well. We later came to realize that he was one of many that occupied our house with us. When my nanny got sick, she made us hang blankets on all the mirrors and shut all the curtains as she saw people in them. My mother slept in the same room as my nanny towards the end, and every night was lively with activity, getting worse as my nanny neared the end. My room being next door, I heard some of the activity myself. The night before my nanny died, my mother told me she was in the bathroom and saw a small, old female mourner hunched over and all dressed in black, holding her hands in prayer, going into my nanny's room. Since my nanny died, the activity in her room has continued, and I know that she is one of the entities that reside in there too. An old boyfriend of mine, a total skeptic who had never been told about this history, stayed over in that room, and in the morning, he told us he had a terrible night's sleep. We asked why, and he said that he could have sworn that something had pushed him out of bed during the night. I think my nanny was trying to tell me something, as he turned out to be a jerk. I still hate going into that room and can always feel the presence of something. Furthermore, no matter what I prop the door open with, it always closes behind me. Even though my nanny's presence is there too, I point blank refuse to sleep in there under any circumstances, as I remember the sleepless nights I had in there too as well. I sometimes wish I'd never opened the door to this part of the universe, as it's scarier to be a believer than a non-believer. In the early 90s, the company I'd worked for had a holiday party in a private room at Floorpaws. The waiter, of course, told us about the supposed hauntings, which made for a nice story. After dinner, our group was given a tour of the restaurant. We were coming down a staircase. I stepped aside to allow a waitress to go upstairs past us. I didn't want to bump her, as she had her hands full. My work partner, Steve, asked from behind me, "What's the matter?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Why did you stop?" I looked at him like he was crazy and said, "I didn't want to bump into the waitress." "What waitress?" He said, "Our waiter was standing at the bottom of the stairs and heard our exchange." He asked me, standing rather close and not making a big deal out of it, what she looked like. And when I told him, he gave me a funny look. And then he said, "That was Molly." In Wisconsin, there was a house that we referred to as the Pink House in River Falls. The pink house is actually written up in the book Haunted Wisconsin, but I had a personal experience there while attending UW, River Falls, in the early 1980s. The pink house is located behind North Hall, and in the spring of 2007 was still painted pink. I was dating a boy who lived there with a few roommates, and we were preparing for a keg party. I was in the kitchen washing pitchers and glasses when I felt him walk up behind me, put his arms around my waist, and kiss the left side of my neck. I smiled and leaned back into him. When I turned my head, there was no one there. Later that evening, I was walking down the hall to the bathroom. The hallway ran straight from the living room, so anyone sitting there could watch down the hall. The bathroom was 2 steps up from the hallway, about halfway down the hall. Well, I tripped. I didn't step up high enough to put my foot on the first stair, and I fell forward. Then, I stopped. All of a sudden, I look up past the stairs, and at the top of the stairs is a woman in a white dress just staring at me. Only this wasn't just a creepy woman. This woman's face was melting, and she was just pointing at me for a millisecond before ultimately disappearing. I could not believe my eyes. It really seemed like this entity wanted me to fall and pushed it with her force. I don't know how spirits can do that, but that's what I felt. Anyway, thank you for reading. I have 2 stories that are going to intertwine with each other. My parents had their house built in 1963. From the time I was a little kid, I would wake up either in the middle of the night or early morning to hear people talking in our living room. I would get up and everyone would be sleeping. I told my mom about it. She would laugh and tell me it was probably dead Indians. According to Michigan history, the land had been owned by the Huron Indians. Being a little kid, I believed her. As I grew up, I didn't hear them anymore. I had my son in 1985, and we had lived in this old house that I knew the previous owner had passed away in. From the first day we had moved in there, I always had the feeling of being watched, and weird things would happen, like the VCR would come on by itself. Doors open and slam shut, and at one time, I saw an elderly woman come up the stairs and walk into the bedroom. My son was 2 years old and told me about a woman with a pink dress was floating over his bed. This happened twice. He started sleeping with me. In 1988, my mother had taken ill, and my father was an over-the-road truck driver. We were asked to move back home, so my mother wouldn't be so home alone. Not long after we moved in, my son started telling me about hearing people in the hallway. This went on all his life. He's 19 now. My mother passed away in 1991. My son was about 6 years old. About a month after she passed, my parents' bedroom was across the hall from the bedroom. One night, my son walked out of the bathroom, then came running in the living room as white as a ghost, telling me he had seen my mother sitting on the bed. She told him, "You be a good boy." Knowing my mother, that's exactly what she would say to him. I believed him. For a year after that, when it got dark, every light was on in the house. I purchased the house from my father in 2002. My husband's son and I have been living there. In 2003, my husband's ex-girlfriend passed away from cancer. She told him she was going to haunt him. After she died, weird stuff started happening. Noises and voices. Music when no radios or TVs were turned on. Stuff would fly out of the cabinets. After a couple of months of this, I demanded that whoever was there to leave. Well, they didn't. I know I have at least 3 ghosts here. My son woke me up a couple of weeks ago and asked me to come in the bathroom. He was hearing a man and a woman talking in the hall. I got up, we went in the bathroom, and we shut the door. At first, nothing. Then I heard a woman's voice. Couldn't make out what was said, but it was definitely a woman's voice. Then last night, I was sitting here on my computer. My husband and I split up 4 months ago. I was here alone. My son was at work, and it was 2 a.m. I was playing in Yahoo games. My computer is in the living room next to the entrance to the hallway. Now the way I sit, I'm facing the wall. I'm here playing a game. Then, I saw someone walking down the hall. For a second I thought it was my son. It was male, and about his size. I saw for about 20 seconds, enough to see I was wearing a baggy t-shirt, tucked into pants. And I didn't see a head, just a torso. Then it faded. I was freaking out. The hair on my arms was standing a mile high, and I was shaking. I turned on every light in the home, called my son at work, told him to come straight home from work. Then last night, I tried to go to bed while my son was at work. He gets home at about 4:30 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I got up, turned on all the lights, and played on the computer till he came home. Well, that's all for now. If anything else happens, I'll let you know. Thank you for reading this. Okay, this is very weird. I just last night experienced for the first time what I think is sleep paralysis. I just want to know your opinion. I was using a pulse oximeter last night so my doctor could look at my sleeping patterns. I was having a hard time sleeping, so I laid on the sofa for a bit to see if I could drift off while watching TV. I didn't have any luck there because I kept hearing this banging noise coming off in the distance, so I went to bed. After about 45 minutes of listening to my husband snore and snort, I decided to go to sleep in my daughter's room. She is away, visiting her grandparents. Anyway, not long after laying down in her bed, I had the feeling I wasn't alone in the room. The door closed when the AC kicked on. At least I hope that's why. And it kinda jolted me awake. I was making up my mind to go back to my bed in my room when the weirdest sensation came over me. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. And that feeling of someone else in that room was overpowering. And I would swear I heard rustling behind my head, coming from the closet. In a minute or so, it stopped, and I went to get out of my bed, and it started again. I tried to get it to stop, but I couldn't make my limbs move. I was terrified. This happened about 6 times in a row. The last time I jumped up and ran to the door, my cat was just outside the door, all hunched and hissing. I jumped into my bed and pulled the covers over my head. Ever since we moved into this house, I felt something here, and even thought I'd caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. My kids have never said anything to me, but they all sleep together in the same bed and often leave the TV in my daughter's room on with the sound off. Now I'm really worried, and I don't know if I want my kids sleeping in there. She's going to be gone through the weekend, and I was thinking about trying to get up the nerve to try to sleep in there again. By the way, I will be calling my doctor to get the results of the pulse oximeter test next week. I'm hoping that I can get a copy and see if there are any strange readings back to back. Thanks for reading my story. It makes me feel better to tell someone. My youngest sister was taking care of an elderly gentleman some time back, and with her pay, They gave her an apartment. The apartment was situated upstairs, and the doctor had an apartment downstairs. Now, the house was really old. I'm not sure just how old, but before the doctor bought it, it was a funeral parlor. Then, many years ago, he made a doctor's office with 5 examination rooms and a records room in front of the home. Now, the house was set up like this. It had both a front door, leading to the doctor's office area, and a back door, which led to his apartment, and stairs, leading up to the other 2 apartments. The one upstairs apartment was vacant, the one in the back, and my sister had the front upstairs apartment. Now, her apartment had the front entrance also. If you walked through the front door, to the left was the old doctor's offices, and a big foyer, with a winding staircase which led to my sister's apartment. If you took the front way, the stairs at the end of the hallway was about 15 feet long, and on your left was the bedroom, the attic entrance, and then straight ahead was the door to her living room. Well, one night I had a dream about that area of her apartment, and the panic and fear I experienced was overwhelming to me, and I couldn't get it off my mind. When I had a visitor, I sensed something, but didn't pay any attention to it until I had this dream. After that, I mostly used the back door. Whenever I would be in that hallway near the front stairs, I would always get this very heavy feeling, and a feeling of urgency to get myself into the living room area, and fast. Just as you entered the living room to the left was her 2 daughters' room. The doctor was very old and senile, so he needed pretty much to be helped with everything. So my sister had baby monitors, both for him to call her, and for her to hear the children at night when she had to go help him with whatever he may need. Well, one night, this was long after my dream, she was upstairs with the doctor, and it was late. My daughter was spending the night. When she had left, the children were sound asleep for hours. She had heard toys going off, and sounds like the children may be up on the monitor. And when she went upstairs to check, they were all sound asleep. My daughter had also sensed some strange things when they were there also. My sister has long since moved, and the doctor has passed away. His daughter lives in the house now. I often want to stop and talk to her, to see if she has noticed anything strange herself. As a child, we were told a lot of creepy things that happened. We lived out in the country. There were a few houses around at the time, and we lived on a 3.5-acre farm. Us kids would go out in the front and play ghost in the graveyard, or sometimes we'd play truth or dare. This one night, we're all holding hands and sitting in a circle, and we kept hearing a noise, saying ooh, and we thought it was just an owl. We asked my brother truth or dare, and before we could say truth, a big black wing, we thought it was a bat, swooped over us. We got up and screamed and looked up into the sky, and there was nothing around. So we thought it was just our imagination. When we went out to look into the field, there stood a figure, completely blackened out, and 3 foot in height. That's what we assumed anyway. We stared at it for as long as we could, before it eventually vanished. It had to be about 10 seconds, but it was there. We had no idea what that was, but it seemed like a shadow person, only a very, very short version. Another time, I went to church and wanted to get my glory on after my sister dying of cancer. Well, let me take you back to her death. She was in the hospital before this happened, and she was taking chemotherapy and radiation, and she kept asking me if she was going to make it, because she didn't want to die. I told her that we all have to come to that day to just pray. She kept smoking, and I told her to stop smoking. That night, she had her last cigarette. I was called at the hospital at 12 midnight. My sister was dying. I started praying in the emergency room, and she wasn't responding, but I could feel her spirit was there, and I was talking to her. I said, "Caroline, hang on." I said, "If it's the will of God, go with him." I came back home because I needed the sleep. She left me in charge of pulling on the cord, or letting them do whatever they needed to help her. I came home and fell asleep. Something was tapping at my window. I woke up, and my sister's face was staring at me in the window. She kept telling me to come to the hospital, and I said no, that I couldn't. I got up and went to the bathroom. I kept smelling cigarette smoke as I sat there on the toilet. There stood my sister in the hallway smoking, and she kept looking at me. I said, "No, this can't be." I went to lie down. I went to pull the cover up, and something pulled the cover down. Something was telling me to come to the hospital. I started crying as I made my way. I said, "Lord, I can't do this on my own. I need you to help me make the right choice. Help her find her destiny." I went into the room and kissed her. I said, "Caroline, it's time you help me make the decision. Either you stay with us or come with the Lord." 5 minutes later, the heart monitor went dead. I started crying because I knew she was gone. We buried her, made funeral arrangements. A few weeks later, I went to church. I was coming down the road. I was happy and singing. It was about 11 at night. It was so funny because the light on the road never takes forever to turn green. I stopped. I felt a cold black feeling come over me. I got chills on my arm. I looked to the passenger side, and there sat my sister Caroline. But it wasn't her. It was an evil spirit form of her. I said, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." The light still wouldn't turn green. I looked over, and the person that I thought was there was no longer there. Disappeared. Whatever form or version of her, that was gone. And that's my story. This is going to be a pretty short story, but it is terrifying, and I think worth sharing with you all on this site. One night, after my grandmother's funeral, I was laying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when my door opened. There was a freezing cold air at my feet. A couple of nights later, there was a white figure that was standing by my door, just like my grandmother used to do. And then all of a sudden, we heard an unexplainable noise coming from my intercom. The noise was a person breathing, and it was very heavy. My grandfather went down to see what it was, but nothing was there. We heard it again. This time, my sister went down with a pocket knife, but nothing was there. One day, me and my two friends were in my room, which was my grandmother's room, before it was mine. The door was opening and closing. Those are my encounters with my grandmother.
I was at a friend's house on the new year of 1999, and she has a giant picture window in her dining room. I was spending the night, and we were the only ones awake. Her parents were asleep in their room, pretty much right next to us, and her brother and sister were asleep on the floor in the living room. We went over to the picture window to try and see the fireworks. We were trying to see them when we heard a clatter right above us. We looked up at the ceiling while hoping it was only rats. We ignored it and continued searching for the sky for fireworks. After about a minute, we heard heavy footsteps. They were horrible. After that night, she still comes to me with outrageous stories from the night before. One of them was not too long ago. She told me that she heard a voice one night while she was having trouble sleeping.
She walked out of her room, looked down the stairs, and saw a dark figure standing at the end of the stairs. She thought it was her mom and started saying something to her, but it wasn't her mom. Not at all. She looked down the stairs closer, and then it opened its eyes. She says they were a bright glowing green. When she told me this, a bolt of pure, unspeakable terror shot down my spine. She also says that after she claimed she was in her room and she looked out her window, she saw in her little sister's room a blood red man looking right at her. She always has terrifying stories, and yet she is never scared or fazed by them herself. I remember in the 3rd grade, I was at her house every morning because I had seen strange figures in my hallway. Every morning, my mom would take me in and I'd lay on the couch. As I watched her headlights dance across the wall and then disappear, the room would lower to an agonizing freezing cold. I guess I could chalk that up to coincidence, but knowing all the experiences I had previously and the ones that I just mentioned, I kinda doubt that. But I know that there is a presence in my house. Thanks for reading. My name is Ian, and I recently just spent 2 weeks in Italy. I live in LA, and was told of the many must-see locations in the area of Tuscany, but the one that most appealed to me was the Torture Museum in the famous city of San Gimignano. On the 9th and last day in Tuscany, before I took my long drive home to Rome, we decided to stop in San Gimignano. My father told me to leave me in the Torture Museum, aka the Criminal Museum, while he went off with my sisters. The Criminal Museum was originally a torture chamber, built during the time of the Spanish and Italian Inquisition. I bought my ticket at around 5:30 p.m. and proceeded to the bottom part of the torture chamber. As I entered the deepest part of the chamber, I got really scared. I was all alone, except for a German man and his children. The chamber was quite odd, and in some places, it was really cold, and I would go back to that same place, and it would not be cold anymore. Light gusts of wind would come out of nowhere, and there were no windows, doors, and it was underground. I began proceeding through the chamber, until I was stopped by a ghostly figure, standing right behind an Iron Maiden. It was a shade of white that I had never seen before. I could barely make it out, but there were depressions where the mouth, eyes, and nose were. I stood frozen for what felt like 10 minutes. It then darted straight across the room, in the direction of the opposite wall. I could even hear its feet going across the floor. I ran like a bat out of hell, and nearly cleared 20 stairs, but fell and slid down the 10 other. I later spoke to the man in the reception room. He asked me where I saw it, and I said in the chamber. He told me that there are hundreds of ghosts in there, and many seem to be insane. I will never forget what happened to me in Italy, and I hope others will enjoy my story. My name is Julie, and I'm 32, mother of a wonderful 4-year-old son, which I would give my life for, married to a wonderful, incredible man. We live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. When I was about 8, I believe, I had my first terrifying experience with the dead. My great-grandma had passed away a few days earlier, although I can't really recall the event all that well. One night, a few days after her death, I woke up in the middle of the night, needing to go to the bathroom. The bathroom was just in front of my bedroom, separated by a long hallway that went basically across the part of the first and only floor. Beside my bedroom was my parents' bedroom. My bedroom to the bathroom was only like 3 feet to walk across the hallway. As I walked towards the bathroom, for some reason, I looked into my parents' bedroom. What I saw terrified me. Across my parents' bed, I saw my great-grandma lying on her side, holding her head, with her left arm looking at me with these black, see-through eyes. I will never forget. Very young and innocent, I didn't really ever think that ghosts really existed. That made me aware of another world that we were not taught about in our upbringing. When I got a little older, we had bought a house in Hawkesbury, Ontario, that we stayed into for I would say 5 to 6 years. I was about 16 at the time. We had just purchased the house, and while my father was renovating the upstairs, the whole family would be sleeping in the basement. One night, as we were spending a little time together, we heard this funny noise upstairs. We thought someone, for some reason, had entered our home, so my father went up to see what was going on. To all of our surprise, all 4 rings of our ceiling light had just fallen on the floor. Not one at a time, but all 4. We could hear footsteps in the house, and when I was alone, the front doorknob would turn, and nobody was even there. I was so terrified. I did not know what to make of these events. At night, I would hear someone open the fridge door and close, open pantry doors and close loud. I would constantly feel a presence. I would barely have any sleep in the house. Sometimes, I would go and sleep with my brother. It is a terrible feeling as a child to be afraid like this. It's not okay. I don't think in any way that this is a funny thing. When you're a child, you get confused and don't understand the logic of these things. Actually, because there is no logic. When I got older in my early 20s, my grandmother passed away. God, I adored her. She was my best friend, and to this day, I miss her like crazy. Not long after she had died, maybe a few nights after, she appeared to me while sitting on the side of my bed, late one night. She appeared right next to me. She had her arm around my neck, and she looked at me saying, "Julie, don't be sad. You know that I'm not really gone." And she disappeared into thin air. I felt such a relief that she felt my sadness, and that she loved me enough to come and comfort me. I will never forget that precious moment. For you, Grandma, I love you. Julie. To start my story, my father and I pretty much had a decent relationship most of my life. Of course, when I was a teenager, I did the usual teenage crap and rebelled, and we grew apart. I had moved out and ended up with an abusive boyfriend. I ended up moving back home, and Dad and I renewed our relationship. Those 9 months before my dad's death were great. We actually got a chance to really talk, and I think my dad knew his time was short. He kept telling me that I would find the right guy eventually, and I would make a good mom someday. On February 11th, 1997, Dad passed away after a long illness that we would discover later was periodontitis. Things didn't start happening right away. It started after I met the man who would be my husband later, and I became pregnant with our son. About 4 months into my pregnancy, we started noticing little things around the house, mostly having to do with noises and objects that belonged to my father. After my son was born, and he was about a month old, my husband and I were watching television in the living room, and the baby was asleep. My mother's room. We were staying with her, due to after Dad died, she couldn't pay the bills on her own, was right off the living room. She had went to bed, and after about a half hour, she said she had seen a white orb about the size of a softball traveling between the bedroom door and her vanity mirror. No light source constant. Her room was pitch black because she kept tinfoil and trash bags over her windows to keep the light out. Then, when we were getting things ready for the wedding, it seemed like all hell broke loose. Objects being thrown, kitchen drawers opening and shutting by themselves, strange noises. You name it, we had it. Then, the wedding day came. I wasn't nervous, because I knew Dad was there. I wore his turquoise ring I gave him for a Father's Day present for something blue. Everyone at the wedding and the reception said they could feel him. Even some of the pictures taken at the reception were questionable. A couple have what appears to have a mist in them. My son is in most of those photographs. Then we didn't really have anything happen for a while, until my son started getting old enough to talk. Then in the evening, when only me and my son were at home, watching TV most times, he would get all excited, as if someone had just come home. He would run up to the baby gate, wave, and yell hi, and I would go up to the gate and look down the hall to see no one there, and I would ask him, "Who are you talking to?" And he would look up at me, and smile and say, "Grandpa, Mama." He never met my father. My son was born on 2100, and Dad died on 2/11/97. After he did this for a couple of weeks, I invested in an EMF detector. After running a few test runs to get readings from the hallway on basic electrical outlets and whatnot, I waited for my son to say hi to Dad again. Sure enough, about a week later, it happened again. This time I ran into the hallway to see if I could get a reading. I did. A perfect circle about 2 feet in diameter, smack dab in the middle of the hallway. I knew it was Dad. We have since moved, but my son still says hi on occasion to Grandpa, and my sister and I can still sense his presence. I'm 19 now, and most of my experiences have happened recently. Although I remember a few from when I was a child, I'm a student at a Big Ten university and stayed in the dorms my first year here. My roommate and I were soon to find out we had another roommate. One night, I was dreaming that I was lying in a bed across from another bed, and a girl was pacing in between. Well, my dream soon faded to reality when I noticed myself blinking. We had lofts, so the floor that was in my dream was now gone, but the girl was still pacing, about 5 feet in the air. I don't know what came over me, and I didn't mean to say anything, but I blurted out, "What are you looking for?" The girl stopped and looked at me. Her eyes were just dark holes, and then faded away. I wasn't scared of her. I just went back to sleep. During other nights, I would be startled awake, what sounded like heavy books being thrown to the floor, and in the morning, nothing would be out of place. Things would go missing, only to end up in the middle of the floor, days later. My first touching experience took place there also. I was taking a nap on the futon with my boyfriend when I felt what I thought was my boyfriend's scruffy chin rub on my forehead. It woke me, but I didn't open my eyes. It happened again, and so I thought he was trying to get my attention. I looked up, expecting to see his face, and there was nothing there. He was about 2 feet away from me, with his back towards me, fast asleep. My roommate, however, had the creepiest experience. She rarely had any, but hers, I think, didn't happen to me. She came in the room from the shower, down the hall, and went to her mirror. When she noticed she had a drop of blood on the tip of her nose, she wiped it off onto her finger, expecting to see a pop zit or something, but her nose was clear. She showed me the blood on her finger and told me what happened, so we checked her arms and legs, everywhere, to see if she had cut herself shaving. We checked her towel, robe, slippers, everything, and there was no blood anywhere else. We still do not know where it came from. Last night was my most recent experience, which made me want to read about stories online. It was at my parents' home, which we all think is haunted by some man. I was ready to fall asleep when I was startled awake by a loud pop in front of my face. Minutes later, I heard dripping water. That ghost mostly bothers my brother, whose bedroom is in the basement, where most of the activity takes place. I would like to share my experiences with someone who doesn't think I'm crazy. When I was 5 years old, my mom, dad, and I moved to a house in Crownsville. It was about 7 years old and had originally been built as a summer home only. My dad did a lot to the house over the years to renovate it. When I was about 10 years old, he finished the new bedroom on the front of the house, and he and my mother moved in. I got their old bedroom at the back of the house. I'm not sure if this bedroom was in the house originally, because it was built on a concrete slab, and the rest of the house was over a basement. My mother claimed to see a ghost materialize from the heating vent into the room. We all laughed it off. Later on, I didn't think it was so funny anymore. My parents were very strict and didn't leave me alone in the house until I was 13. After they left, I was really creeped out by the feeling in the house. I felt as though I was being watched. I wandered into the kitchen and heard a really weird sound. Then I noticed that the cupboard doors were moving. It looked like they were vibrating. I recognized the noise. It's the glass that's in the cabinets all vibrating against one another. I ran back to my room and stayed there till my parents got back. One time, I got this brilliant idea to bring a Ouija board into the house. My grandmother had lots of junk in her backyard, and as I dug around, I had found the board wedged between two small buildings. If I'd been a bit older and a bit smarter, I would have left the damn thing there. I shoved it into the back floorboard of my mother's car, underneath my jacket. Somehow, I snuck it inside later on, without being seen. It was just a board in the planchet, the Parker Brothers kind. I put it in my underwear drawer, all the way at the bottom, hoping to play with it later. I had failed school that year, so I had to go to summer school. I knew I would have to get up early, so I went to bed early. I was wakened sometime later, after my parents went to bed. I thought I heard a rattling. I listened for several minutes, heard nothing, and went back to sleep. I woke up again, a little while later. Again, I thought I heard rattling, and this time, I thought it had come from my dresser. I was slightly freaked out, but I heard nothing after a few intense minutes of listening, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. I woke up a third time. This time, I was angry. I still heard it when I woke all the way up, so I hurried and turned my light on. I saw the dresser drawer move for a few seconds, then it stopped. There was no more sleep for me to be had that night. The light stayed on, and I stayed sitting up in my bed till dawn. Then I got into the dresser, snapped the board in pieces, and threw it out my back window. The last thing that happened, while I lived in the house, occurred when my best friend stayed the night. We were supposed to be sleeping in my bed, but being kids, we were up talking. We both shut up at once and looked out my bedroom door. It was the kind of house where all the doors line up. I could look out of my door and see clear to my parents' bedroom door. In between were my old room, the kitchen, and the living room. We both saw glowing orbs floating around in the living room. There were about 5 of them, and they were way brighter than any of the lamps we had. She and I stared in awe for a few minutes, and then they faded away. She and I are still friends, but we never have talked about the glowing balls floating around my living room. Thanks for listening. I have been able to explain what happened the night of the Ouija board rattlings. For all I know, it could be the workings of an overactive imagination, but it sure seemed to be real to me. The terror of that night never has faded. Hi. I've owned this large, 3-story, late 1800s building for the past 25 years or so. The first floor is 2 storefronts, and the second and third originally had 3 apartments per floor. I converted 2 of the second floor apartments into one large apartment for myself. When I first bought the building, I had a great deal of work to do on it. My mother would occasionally visit, and she would ask me who was in the back room of the main store. There was no one there, but she would insist. I never thought much about this until later in life, and she now sees non-existent people nearly everywhere. Sometime after gutting the building and making it partly usable, I was working on the first floor and saw a young boy running through the store. Since the place was locked up tight, and there were 7 alarm systems, and only one was off, it was impossible for the child to hide from me. No child was to be found. Over the years, I, and many others, have seen a child running through the store. I've seen the occasional person while looking in a mirror, although this doesn't happen often. Many years ago, my friend Scott shared the apartment and had a rear bedroom of his own. One evening, he came out to see me when I got home and complained that something had sexually assaulted him. He found the event very painful. I somewhat dismissed this as folly on his part, but never forgot it. A few years later, I rented that same room to another fellow, and he had a similar experience. He moved out the next day. I rented a room to a fellow who was gay. He never had problems until his friend came over to visit. They were alone in the bed at the time. They were in the bedroom when the bed lifted a few inches off the floor and fell down. Then the bed moved a couple of feet from its location. Finally, the tenant had a set of barbells sitting on the floor. They were tossed up in the air several times, hitting the floor with a bang. After this happened, I began to read up on getting rid of spirits in the building. I placed a pentagram with proper symbols in the room above the tenant's room and went through the ceremony. From that day forward, nothing else happened in the building. That is, until the roof leaked above the room, and I bought up a tarp and bucket to catch the leak. The tarp covered the pentagram. Since then, people, including myself, see things in the building, mostly visions of people. Some people leave the building immediately when this happens. Over the years, nothing has ever happened to me physically, and my sightings of spirits are rare. I'd like to mention another place in Buffalo. It is on West Avenue, near Ferry. The location was originally Buffalo's hanging grounds, and now there are houses on it. My friend Paul owns the house. Occasionally, when no one is in the house, there will be loud screams coming from inside the house. Police have been summoned by neighbors on several occasions, but couldn't find anything out. Thanks for reading. I had a couple of strange experiences at a cemetery in Vancouver as a teenager, about 15 years ago or so. Everyone I've told the story to over the years seems to get a chill run down their necks from hearing it, so I thought it would make a good addition to your website, which I enjoy reading through on occasion, as I'm interested in hearing about other people's experiences with the unexplained. Back in the late 80s, I hung around with a group of friends who I'd hang around with and mostly get into trouble with. I guess looking back, we didn't really have any beliefs or interest in the supernatural or spirituality, and I suppose we were kind of like teenage nihilists in a way, getting into trouble with the police and partying a lot, not conscientious about school or the future. So what would happen at the cemetery would all seem the more strange. Well, anyways, one school night, we were out looking for something to do at around 10 or 11 at night, and we couldn't really think of anything as it was midweek, and most people our age only went out on the weekends. We ended up just driving around with no destination in mind, and at one point, someone suggested we go to a local cemetery, just because we had nowhere else to go. This cemetery is cut into the forest on the side of a mountain, and is basically just a giant field surrounded by trees, and all the headstones are just flat plates on the ground, so that if you didn't know it was a cemetery, it would just appear as a big empty field upon entering it. The point is that there's absolutely nothing to obstruct your view or cast strange shadows in the cemetery. To get into the cemetery, you have to drive through a 40-meter winding road that runs through trees and bushes, etc. And this road eventually branches out so that cars can access different parts of the cemetery. There were 3 of us in the car, with myself driving, a friend in the front seat and one in the back. As I pulled the car into the small entrance road, I slowed the car right down and put on the high beams and drove the car at a snail's pace towards the cemetery. As we made the last little bend in the road and entered the cemetery, the high beam suddenly illuminated the entire field, and it was at this point that I suddenly and finally jammed my foot on the brakes, because about 15 meters in front of us stood a group of about 30 to 40 people. I think I recall my friend sitting next to me, saying something to the effect of, "What the hell is going on here?" I don't know. I answered maybe some kind of midnight burial or something, and then cracking some joke that maybe they were druids. I remember my friend, in the back seat, suggesting that we back the car the way we came in, so as not to disturb whatever was going on, which I declined doing, saying it would be a better idea to make the first turn and come around, as it's a narrow road. At this time, probably about 20 to 30 seconds might have passed, and I took my foot off the brake, and we proceeded forward. After the car had moved forward, maybe 15 feet, and I was staring intently at the group of the people the whole time, there strangely now seemed to be less of them, which confused me. Although I remember slight movement within the group, they didn't seem to be bothered by the headlights, and I don't recall any of them looking directly at us. Well, by the time the car had reached about half the distance to where they were standing, and this is the odd part, there was no one left standing there, just an empty field, and it was at this point, when I hit the brakes again, I can remember the intense feeling of my scalp feeling like it was covered in goosebumps and shrinking, because it was only at this point that it clicked into my mind that something ghostly and unnatural had occurred. I drove the car up to a spot alongside where the group was standing and rolled down the window to have a closer look, but there was no explanation for what we had seen. At this point, someone suggested that we get the heck out of there, and we did, quickly. I can think of no possible explanation for what happened, and even went up there a couple weeks later with the same car, but a different friend, to see if maybe we could duplicate the feat and try to come up with some explanation, but we were unsuccessful. Strange thing was that all three of us saw the same thing from different vantage points, and there was nothing that the headlights could have refracted off to cause an illusion against the windshield. And anyways, the groups were clearly standing at a distance of 50 or so meters in three-dimensional space, so there's no way it could have been a reflection. When I tried to duplicate the experience in the same car, nothing happened. I suppose it was this experience that has caused me to have a belief in a greater reality than we see in our everyday lives. Something else happened at that cemetery months later, not quite as strange, but strange nonetheless. But this email has turned out longer than I intended it to, so perhaps I'll submit it another time. I've had a family member who was buried at that cemetery since that time, and the experience has helped me to believe that perhaps some of them is still with us in some way. I would like to share the experience we've had, my husband and I, with the ghost of a dead boy. We had some pretty scary moments. A few years ago, we moved into our new home. An old lady had lived there for years and had passed away 2 years before shortly after she moved into an old people's home. The house had been left empty since she moved out. We were the first ones to move in. It was the beginning of springtime, so it was a little cold inside. As we turned on the central heating system, we heard a noise as if a kettle was whistling. We thought it was just a little dry, as it had not been used in the last 2 years. This was just the beginning. When you entered our house, you would see a hallway surrounded by the living room, bathroom, bedrooms, and closet with the central heating system inside. As time passed away, we did not take any notice of the heating system making noise. I must say, I felt kinda awkward when I passed a particular closet. Next thing happened was on our clock. The pendulum would stop at different times. I would give it a swing, and it would keep going for days. It happened many times, and looking back on it, our cats were always looking at things we weren't able to see, especially into the direction of the clock. Then our candles. We used to burn them every night, at 2 places in our living room. We never had any problems with drafts, but suddenly, we noticed our candles were burning unsteadily. All these things happened in our living room, and we never thought anything of it, until one evening, the pendulum stopped, the candles started flickering, and a cold chill went through the room. The temperature dropped instantly, and suddenly, the noise from the central heating system didn't sound like a whistling kettle anymore, but like a stream drain running right through our living room. We looked at the TV, and suddenly, we saw the display changing numbers, and the screen turned to snow. It looked like it was trying to find a channel to display something we did not want to see. My husband rushed to the thermostat to turn it down, so the central heating would stop making noise. The TV went back to the channel we had been watching before, and everything went back to normal. Except for the 2 of us, we were scared to death, and we realized that something was haunting us. As we thought back at all the times the pendulum stopped, the noises from the central heating, the uncomfortable feeling we got from that closet and the candles, something or someone was trying to scare us out of our home. I told my husband that it was time to take some action, or things could get worse. As we decided to go to bed, the central heating started whistling again, and as I passed the closet, I yelled at it, "Stop it, and shut up." Believe it or not, it did stop. Relieved as I was, I rushed into the bedroom to find a halogen lamp flickering heavily, and the whistling started again. I decided to take a run through the hallway, back into the living room, to turn the thermostat off, so the noise would stop. My husband was too scared to get out of bed, And I'll tell you, I wasn't happy either, but I managed to do so, and I was glad to return to bed, hiding under the sheets. The next day, I decided to call a psychic called Jan, who's well known for leading ghosts into another dimension with the help of his guide, Layla. Through Layla, he was told that a young man in his early 20s had been living here before we moved in. He had died, jumping or falling off a bridge in Rotterdam. We were never told his name, so we could not do any research on this guy. Layla led him into the lights, and all went quiet and peaceful. We moved out of the house a few years later, and we're glad we never encountered anything like this again. It still gives me the creeps just thinking about it. Kind regards, and good luck with your website. I'm not sure if you'll understand my English, since it's been a while since I studied it, so if you have any questions, let me know. It happened when I was in my early teens. I think first, I should describe my room to you. It's the very smallest room in the whole apartment. The bed was placed facing the door, and the piano was on the left side of the door. That day, my sister was sleeping in the room, on the floor. I don't know exactly what time this incident happened. All I know is that it was scary. So, I woke up in the middle of the night, opened my eyes to see a Grim Reaper with a scythe just standing there. His face was hidden under the hood, but the face under the hood was glaring with a very weird greenish light. My body was paralyzed. The only parts of my body I still had control over were my eyes. Suddenly, he started laughing, but it was a silent laugh. The most unusual thing about this, though, was that I could still hear him laughing, even though it was silent. His laugh would be best described as something evil and demonic. It was just cruel. I closed my eyes because I couldn't look at it any longer, and if I did, my heart would have jumped out of my mouth. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. I could still hear his laugh. It's weird that I fell asleep after that. After this incident, strange things started happening to me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my body stiff and be afraid of nothing, even if I was alone in the room. Or I'd feel like something's trying to touch me. Having dreams about people I don't know, and they always tell me that they're dead. This happened some 7 years ago, in 1996. The office building where I worked then used to be a hotel. I was told there were 2 ghosts in the building. One, on the 7th floor, was supposed to be the ghost of a murdered hotel maid, but no one could tell where or what the second one was supposed to be. I shared an office on the corner of the 3rd floor, and my colleague and I would often look up from our work, expecting to see someone, but there was never anyone there. We both felt that someone had walked through the office door, which we kept open for ventilation. An old office building such as this one did not have air conditioning. We talked about this and discovered that we each had this experience on several occasions. Sometimes we were alone, sometimes when we were both in the office. We eventually decided that we must be hearing someone walk along the corridor past the office, and after this, our imaginary visitor did not make their presence felt nearly so often. Then one morning, as I came back from the small area known as the tea bay after making myself a coffee, I distinctly saw a man enter our office doorway. When I followed a few seconds later, there was only my colleague there. He insisted that no one had come through the door, and he said I must have been seeing someone going around the corner. I maintained that I had distinctly seen someone in the light coming from our doorway, and that the corridor beyond our office was dark at that time because the lighting was being replaced. A few weeks later, I saw the same man going into the tea bay, which is no more than an alcove with a water heater, refrigerator, and cleaning facilities, and when I got there, it was empty. There was no way he could have come out again without passing me. There was no other exit. I told my colleagues, and they said I must have seen someone going into either the men's or the women's toilets, which are on either side of the tea bay. I maintain that I saw someone going into the tea bay. If they had gone into the toilets, I would have heard the doors closing. There are none on the tea bay. Hello there. I've never thought of myself as being sensitive to paranormal things, but I've had too many experiences that I cannot explain easily. I would like to take this time and share 2 memorable experiences with you. Mind you, most of my experiences were feelings of not being alone, hairs of my neck rising, feelings of being watched, getting overwhelmed with sadness, hatred, and anger suddenly. I'm going to start off with my brush with the Martin House, listed in the Haunted Places Index under Panama City, Florida, at the age of 8 years. In 1978, it was owned by the paper mill company that was located across the street from the house. The Martin House sat on a huge amount of land and was surrounded by trees with moss hanging from them. There was a waterway running past the right of the house, looking at the front porch. The paper mill would rent this house out to various groups for parties. At the time, my father was in the Air Force, and his maintenance group rented out the house several times. I kind of felt safe on the lower floor and around the house grounds. I always made sure that my sister, 7 years old, and I stayed with a group of people at all times. For the most part, kids were running all over the lower section of the house, and we had plenty of places to explore. We were told from the beginning not to go upstairs because it was not safe. A group of us, me included, decided to explore the upstairs area after we ate some food. I led the way up after the first 5 steps and stopped. I was looking at the top of the stairs and had the feeling of being watched by someone very bad. I let the boy behind me go first. We all started up the stairs and I stopped again, feeling very uneasy. Couldn't seem to catch my breath. I was pushed out of the way by the other kids who went up the stairs. I went back down a ways until I was in the light that was shining from below and waited there still uneasy. Then the kids started to scream and came running down the stairs with me in front and told their parents that a very scary man was staring at them. Our parents went up to look around and could not find anyone. We all got punished. Each time we went to find that house, I was always looking up at one set of windows overlooking the waterway. I felt like I was being watched by something. Last, the ankle grabber. I was 23 years old and visiting my sister in Marietta, Georgia. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. The 2 bedrooms were located on the left side of the hallway, with the bathroom right across the room. I would be staying in with my mom. This room had a faint, nasty odor that got stronger towards the closet. My first 2 nights there in the room, I felt uneasy, like I was being watched, and fell asleep watching the closet door. I had a restless sleep, and I always woke up looking at the closet door. The 3rd day, I helped my sister get some extra boxes put away in the closet. It smelled like rotting flesh. It was extremely cold and unpleasant being in there. My sister said that she had tried everything to get the smell out, but nothing worked. That night, my mom decided to sleep out in the living room. I fell asleep the same way, eyes on the closet. I suddenly woke up to the feeling of someone rubbing their thumb down the length of my right foot very hard. It then went into spasms. I looked around the bed, thinking it might have been my sister. Nothing, but that closet door was slightly opened, and it was not how I left it before I went to bed. I wasn't able to go to bed the rest of the night, and my daughter slept soundly. The next day was uneventful, except when my daughter was taking a nap. Strange sounds were coming from her baby monitor. I went down the hallway with a feeling of dread, and went into the room to look around. Nothing was out of place, and I even checked my daughter for marks. There were none, but I did take her out of the room to finish her nap in the living room. That night, I was hot and decided to sleep on top of the covers. Again, my mom slept in the living room. I placed my daughter's playpen in a safer part of the room. I slept in the middle of the bed, with my right hand on the middle of the pillow. I woke up in terror when my ankle was grabbed and I was jerked 6 inches off of my pillow. My right leg was hanging off the end of the bed, and my left leg was bent. I got up, picked up my daughter and went to sleep in the living room. In the morning, I asked my mom about any unusual experiences in that room. She said she didn't have anything funny happen to her. Just then, my sister let me know that her former roommate had complained of hearing footsteps in the room when no one else was in there. The room, by the way, was carpeted. Unusual sounds, bad smells, and being watched. I asked my sister to move out of her apartment. My daughter and I spent the rest of the visit sleeping in the living room. On the last day, I went into the room, threatened if it ever hurt my family members, I would be its worst nightmare when I died, and called it every dirty name in the book. I figured I'd take my chances and say it anyway, even if I sound ridiculous and yell at nothing. I would like to thank you for your time, and thank you most of all for allowing me to share my experiences with you. I know the paranormal can bring a lot of skepticism into this world, but I also know there are things you just can't explain. I believe in the paranormal. I believe in the things that go bump in the night, and I certainly won't dismiss something just because someone thinks it's something crazy that may not be existing. Keep an open mind. Don't be so dismissive, because you never know when something may lurk on you, and you never know when you're being watched.
Here's kind of a creepy story. I go to school at Lalu, and my school, mind you, it is a private school. There have been a few suicides and drownings. We are on a lake, and other things such like that. Well, many students here have seen the Lalu ghost, and apparently, we have more than one haunting. One of my friend's sisters was being followed around by it. At one part of the school, there are wooden steps, which makes lots of noise when you walk down them. She started to walk down them, and she heard loud footsteps behind her. She stopped. It stopped. She looked around. No one was there. So, she kept going, and the footstep kept going. That, from what I heard, was the last time I know that the ghost had been sighted, until 2 weeks ago. It was a late Thursday afternoon when my friends Kai, Clover, and Jess walked down to the Pine Room, which is basically our storage room in Lost and Found, to get a binder or something. When they went down there, Clover had started to feel a presence. Kai saw a flicker of light, and Jess saw the entire figure of what she could only explain as a ball of white light. All three of them just got what they needed and left, talking about this ghost. This is how I found out. I overheard them talking, and so did my friend, Jake. Jake is the most skeptical person I've ever met in my entire life. He doesn't even believe in luck. I had told Jake about this, and he basically laughed, and we went to go see Kai, who seems to be the resident expert on the occult here at Lalu, and find out what happened. Dave, who is also a skeptic, was laughing at her for saying this, and wanted to see it himself. Kai told all three of us not to go down there. It'll just make him mad, and I trusted her, mainly because I believe in ghosts and the supernatural, and everything like that, and I stayed. Where Jake and Dave went down to the Pine Room to try to see it, they came back empty-handed and laughing. We talked a little bit more about the ghost, and what it could potentially do to you if it was mad enough. Then, Jake and Adder decided to try again. By this time, about 10 other people found out and wanted to see it too. Everyone went down, and everyone heard a loud bang, but nothing else. Then everyone went back up, but for some reason, Jake was called back downstairs. He was just inside of the door when he saw this ball of light pass in front of him to the adjacent corner. Scared, he ran as fast as he could, back up to where me and Kai were waiting. He told us of this story, and David overheard as well. So, being the idiot that he is, Dave went back down there and, yet again, didn't see anyone or anything. Dave then went to go see Clover, who was waiting in the stairwell down the hall to where we were at. We started to follow, slower than him, and about halfway, we all had the same feeling as Dave Giuliano did in his story.
the hairs on her arms sticking up, and an uncomfortable constant shiver. At that time, in unison, we all asked, "Did you feel that?" Then, the creepiest thing happened to me. A feeling of soft, very, very soft hands, almost like wind, only solid, ran across my arm. And later, I found out that every time that Jake had walked by that spot and that feeling happened, his legs started cramping up. We went to the stairwell and we talked with the two. Kai was shouting at Dave because it was challenging the ghost to its face, and then she moved over a little, and both me and Jake saw it. We didn't see anything, really, but we knew it was there in its exact movements. Move over from the exact spot she was standing, right over to where Dave was squatting, and, after David challenged the ghost again, we left. After all this, I found out from Kai that it was a different ghost, and that when Dave challenged it, she had saw it laughing. Within 2 days of this sighting, my friends Ben and Jamie were playing with the camera to use up the film, which only had 3 pictures left, and it was disposable. Ben's had looked through the viewfinder and saw a ball of light behind Jamie and took the picture. They developed the film, and it was caught on film. Hi, I'm from Ireland, and I haven't seen many stories from here. Well, my experience started in 1997. I was 15 when we moved to the house. We moved to a little village in Wexford. Our new house is over 150 years old, but has been done up and looks modern. Anyway, about 2 weeks after moving into our new house, I was trying to go to sleep one night when I heard someone calling the name Martin. I shared a room with my younger sister at the time, and she was fast asleep. I was wide awake, and whoever was calling the name called it about 5 or 6 times. The next day, when I woke up, I went down to my parents and asked who lived in the house before us. They told me don't be stupid, and that I know. Then, I asked who lived in the house before the people we bought the house off of, and I was told a man's name, called Jimmy Martin, and his wife. At first I thought this was a coincidence, and I never said what happened the night before. I soon started to feel someone was watching me all the time, especially in the sitting room. It is hard to explain, but even though I could not see anything, I could tell you there was an old lady standing in front of the sitting room door, and this is where she always stands. I was afraid to go to sleep some nights, as one night, when I was laying in my bed, something kept hitting me on the back of my head, as if to try and wake me up. Well, I was wide awake, but I was too scared to look, as I was afraid of what I could see. Another night, I was just dozing off, when someone decided to sit on the edge of my bed. This frightened the life out of me. I had kept all these experiences to myself, as I thought if I told anyone, they would think I was mad. I had an ensuite in my room, and one night, the toilet handle started going up and down by itself. Everything was getting to me, so after 3 years of keeping it all to myself, I started telling some of my friends what was happening to me. They thought it was scary, and asked me what my parents thought. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't tell them, but I just said they would think I'm mad. Anyway, more stuff started happening, but nothing serious. I went out for a few drinks with my mom and one of their friends, and when the night was over, we all came back to my house and had a cup of tea and a chat. They got onto the subjects of spirits and started talking about past experiences they had. I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to tell them about mine. I started with my sentence with, "You're going to think I'm mad, but," and then I started to cry. I told them everything that was happening to me, and to my surprise, they had their own experiences. My dad was sitting in the sitting room one night, reading the newspaper, when a woman started whispering his name and started running her fingers down through his hair. My mom has heard them walk around upstairs, and she could hear them call her name sometimes. And when she was in bed one night, it was like someone was blowing cold air into her ear. My brother woke me up one night because there was an argument going on in his room, and to his surprise, there was 5 spirits in his room bickering at each other. His room is across from mine. My mom and dad were annoyed with me because I never told them what was happening to me. We have 2 bedrooms upstairs and 2 downstairs. Me and my sister used to share a room upstairs, but she has now moved out, and my brother, who has also slept upstairs, has moved out now, so I'm up there by myself, and some nights, I can feel there's someone there, and it would take me half the night to go to sleep, as I would be terrified, lying in my bed. I'm 21, and the eldest of 4 children. Now that my brother and one of my sisters have moved out, my little sister, 13, looks up to me and likes to do stuff together. She's often asked me about my experiences, which are still happening today, but I won't tell her too much, as it would frighten her. To end my story, I will tell you about a reading we held in our house. A man came to our house who can see spirits, and he gave about 10 of us our readings. I was first to get mine done, and as I sat down, the kitchen door opened. As I got up to shut it, the man told me to wait a minute. He then told me that he isn't now, and that I should shut the door. This sent a shiver down my spine. He told my mother how I can sense spirits, and how a bad spirit entered the room with me. He said that he got rid of him, but there is a spirit that follows me around, but it's a good spirit, and this is the one that I can sense around me all the time. He said that there are a few spirits in my house, but they're good, well except the bad one he got rid of. Well, that's my story, and it's going on today. The good news is, I've just learned to live with it, in the sleepless nights at times. Hopefully I'll be the next to move, because the terror drives me mad sometimes. Thank you. First off, I'm 19 and have believed in ghosts my entire life. Now, I don't have a sixth sense, but I find it fun to discuss ghosts and all sorts of unexplained occurrences. I'm a pretty athletic guy and played football through high school and am pretty strong too. I can bench 280. I'm not saying this to sound like I'm bragging, just to say I'm not afraid of that much, but what happened to me 2 summers ago left me pretty shaken. I was about 17 at the time and had found out about a haunted church through my mother. She had gone when she was younger. Nothing happened, except she had a really weird feeling the whole time she was there. Well, finding ghosts fascinating, I wanted to go, but didn't want to go by myself, so I told my brother about it. We decided to go on a Saturday night. Maybe we'd have a story to tell at the parties. My brother at the time was 15, and he wanted to bring some friends along, so I agreed. Altogether, there were the 5 of us: me, my brother, my brother's friend, and 2 girls they wanted to impress. The layout of the church goes like this. The church is in the middle of a field, surrounded by woods. All around the church in sort of a U pattern are graves. The graves start a little ahead of the church and meet in back, forming the U. There is no space between the graves and church for a few people to walk. In front of the church is a stone wall about 3 feet high and 2 sensor trigger lights on each side of the stone wall. We parked in a little dirt parking lot right in front of the church and got out. Me, being the oldest and assumed the bravest, went over the wall first. As soon as my feet hit the ground on the other side of the fence, I got a really bad feeling and my hair stood on end. The first thing we did was go up to the front steps and hang out for the first couple of minutes. The thing that struck me was that there was no noise at all inside the wall, no crickets or anything, which is strange because it's surrounded by woods. Once we got bored of sitting around, we decided to go around back. That's when the really weird stuff started to happen. We were walking in a straight line because none of the younger kids wanted to be last. It was me, my brother's friend, the 2 girls, and my brother. That was the order from left to right. We were walking so that I was closest to the grave, and my brother was closest to the church. About halfway down the length of the church, we all heard a whooshing sound. My brother's friend and I to the left, and my brother and the 2 girls to the right, like we were being surrounded. Everyone asked each other if they heard the sound, and we all answered yes. After that noise, Mike, my brother's friend, and the two girls wanted to leave, but my brother and I convinced them to stay. Not that I wasn't scared, I just wanted to see more. I forgot to mention that me and my brother both had flashlights, which gets important. As we made our way to the back of the church, we all heard a loud hum, kind of like electric wires, but no one were around. This sound kept getting louder. Also, this went on through the whole entire time we were there, and probably would have scared us enough, if not for what happened next. At about the same time, I heard a noise. I saw a black ink blot, like shape move from a grave to behind a bush. I tried to follow it with a flashlight, but it was too fast. However, Mike saw it move from that same bush to behind another tree. From that point, we would hear sounds and directions all around us, and when my flashlight or my brother's was aimed at the spot we heard the sound, we would just get a glimpse of a shape going back the way the light came to, too fast for us to follow it. Now, there had to be more than one of whatever they were, because as me and Mike were going through this on one side, my brother and the two girls were doing the same on the other side. All of a sudden, I heard my brother and the two girls scream. My brother is a pretty tough kid himself, and I never heard him scream like that in my entire life. Never mind the girls. When I turned to see what was wrong, the three were sprinting out of there at a very fast pace. When I heard them scream, I almost panicked, but got my nerves under control. Mike, however, took off like a world-class sprinter, leaving me by myself. Not wanting to be the only one there, I backpedaled as fast as I could, so I could see whatever it was, if it was coming after us. At this point, the humming was almost deafening, and that's when I got the impression that whatever was making the sound was coming closer at every very fast pace. At that same moment, my flashlight went dead, and then I did panic. I turned and ran faster than ever before in my life. When I reached the stone wall, I saw everyone else in the car waiting for me. I just jumped the stone wall. As soon as my feet landed, the flashlight went back on. The humming stopped, and I heard, guess what? Crickets chirping. Also, all the feelings of fear I had disappeared, and everything was calm. I got in the car and asked what my brother and the girls had seen. They said it was the body of a little girl floating inside the second-story window. At that time, the sensor lights went on, meaning something was coming towards the gate. Remembering the humming sound, I took off as fast as possible. There have been other stories about how people have seen the little girl or heard her playing the flute, but none to the extent of ours. After this happened, I did a little research, and this is what I found. In the 70s, a man raped and murdered 5 young women and buried them in the back of the graveyard behind the church. I don't know where the little girl comes into the picture, but that is what everyone sees. Later, when I asked my brother why a little girl scared them so much, he said the face looked mad, like it wanted us out, and he just got a bad feeling when he saw it. And this is the only ghostly experience, and hopefully the only bad one I'll ever have, and this story is 100% true. Hi, not sure if you are interested, but here's a couple of stories from the place I live in Tasmania, Australia. My boyfriend and I live in Daisy Cottage, an 1832 brick and stone house in Marquis Street, South Hobart, Tasmania, Australia. Daisy Cottage was originally built as a 9-room hotel by an Irish stonemason. He built an almost identical house right next door for himself, which has been empty the entire time we have lived in Daisy Cottage. Legend has it that he witnessed the stabbing murder of the local policeman and testified against the killer in court. The killer was sentenced to lashings, followed by hanging death, and apparently it is he who haunts the house. Strange things have happened, but only one of us is in the house. The first thing happened to Chris, my boyfriend. He arrived home from work one day and checked the mailbox for an important letter that he was expecting. He took it out of the mailbox, opened the front door, and headed upstairs to the bedroom to get changed. On the way, he started to open the letter. Once upstairs, He realized it was raining, so he put the partially open letter on the bed and went downstairs and out into the back courtyard to take the washing off the clothesline. Once he got back inside, he went back to open and read the letter, and it was not there. After about 30 minutes of searching, he called me out of frustration. I arrived home and helped him look for the letter, turning the house upside down. Eventually I said, "Are you sure you took it out of the letterbox? Maybe you should check." Sure enough, there it was, sitting in the letterbox, partially opened. Second strange thing happened 2 days ago. I was alone in the house, doing some painting. It was getting dark, so I turned on the hall, bathroom, dining room, and kitchen lights, and had not ventured upstairs at all. I finished, cleaned up, and started turning off all the lights, getting ready to leave, as we currently aren't staying there during the renovations. I got to the front door and realized that there were lights still on in the house. Every single light upstairs had been turned on. As I left, I noticed that there was a light on in the upstairs of the empty house, next door. The one thing that really got me though, as I was looking towards that house, I noticed some kind of print, like a handprint there. When I say handprint, I mean a floating hand. It was very faded, and then it just disappeared. Well, I guess he needed some light in the house. Thanks for reading.
Hey Phantom, so first of all, I'd appreciate your subs, your likes, and your comments below. This is a compilation, of course. I really appreciate it because as a small YouTuber, I need all the subscriptions, the comments I can get, especially since we're getting closer to 31K, and YouTube and the algorithm doesn't like me if, people don't join the video and they don't interact and stuff like that. But it's more than that. I love you guys' interactions, I love you guys, and I love videos. So hope you enjoyed this video. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.